Chapter 1063. In view of the host's serious and perfect completion of the system mission with a good attitude, the high-level recipe library will be open to the god of cookery advanced lottery. The host has a certain chance of drawing a high-level dish. You have 2 chances to draw. Please prepare to draw. The system's voice sounded, and the names of dishes flashed on the big red wheel. It was not like before, where each grid had a fixed name. It looked rather strange. High-level dish? What's that? Meg could not help but ask curiously. This was the first time he had heard of such a thing. Could it be that the recipes given to him by the system before were only low-level dishes? There is no difference between good and bad food, but in this world, the effects it can bring to the consumer are different. Yangzhou fried rice has a certain refreshing and recovery effect. Its effect is similar to recovery potion. Its effect is low-level. Tofu pudding has the effect of beautifying and removing scars. For women, it is no different from giving a new life. Its effect is mid-level. Beggar's chicken has a certain chance of giving seafood the ability to breathe on land. Its effect can be considered high-level. However, because the target audience is small and there is a certain coincidence, it can only be considered mid-level. As for those dishes that have left a deep mark in the history of food and have a strong effect on most consumers, they are called high-level dishes. The system replied, "There's such a thing? Could this be the legendary indigo root?" Meg raised his eyebrows thoughtfully. The system's grading was very simple. It graded dishes according to their effects. The more advanced the function, the higher the grade. It was very clear. However, this grading was actually different from person to person. For example, Rujiamo should be a high-level dish for the Burning Legion. For ordinary people, eating it would only increase their vitality and would not have such a big effect. High-level dishes that had a strong effect on everyone really made people look forward to it. Meg's face revealed a look of anticipation. He rubbed his hands and was ready to open the big wheel. Host, don't be too excited. This time, only a small number of high-level dishes are available. The probability of the host drawing a high-level recipe is 3%. The system quickly poured a bucket of cold water over him. Damn! Meg immediately sobered up. After thinking for a while, he asked, "System, what's the probability of thank you for your patronage?" 30%, system. What the fuck? What the fuck? Bounce. Rebound. Meg rubbed the space between his eyebrows. The chances of getting a thank you for your patronage were 100 times higher than getting a high-grade recipe. This was simply depressing. After taking 2 deep breaths to calm down, Meg looked at the big wheel and touched the start button with his consciousness. The red roulette will spun crazily, and the words in the empty space on the roulette will flash crazily. What could it be? Meg watched nervously. The speed of the turntable gradually slowed down, and the words on the turntable became clearer. The names of the dishes appeared on the turntable one after another. Fried pork tenderloin, big plate chicken, roasted donkey meat, pork stewed with vermicelli. Meg couldn't help but gulp just by looking at it. The names of the dishes were so familiar. Just thinking about them made her salivate. However, the blank spaces in between made him a little scared. There were too many blank spaces. If he landed on a blank space, then all the hard work he had done before would have been for nothing. The wheel slowly stopped under Meg's intense gaze. Youtiao and soybean milk set meal? Meg blinked. After making sure he didn't see wrongly, he asked tentatively, "System, is this a high-grade recipe?" "This is the first time I've seen a set meal." "No, it's not." The system answered calmly. "Youtiao and soybean milk. I'm really unlucky." Meg sighed. Looking at the other recipes on the roulette wheel, he felt a little complicated. No matter how he looked at it, the youtiao and soybean milk set meal was the simplest and lowest grade among the recipes on the roulette wheel. Moreover, he didn't really like eating youtiao. The oil that was used repeatedly was a little unclean in his opinion. Besides, it tasted greasy. When it was just taken out of the pot, it was hot to the mouth. After a while, it became cold and hard to chew. However, if it was boiled in the hot pot, he could eat a few. The youtiao was boiled casually in the boiling hot pot and then picked up immediately. The texture was not bad. He liked the soybean milk, but it was only freshly ground. "System, What's the effect of the soybean milk in youtiao? Meg didn't give up and asked. Host, please figure out by yourself. The system answered coldly. All right, I'll just take it as filling the gap for breakfast. It's indeed a little strange to eat fried rice for breakfast every day. Moreover, the youtiao and soybean milk produced by the system should be different. Meg comforted himself in his heart. Although he was a little upset that he didn't draw a high-grade dish, it was still good enough that he didn't draw a thank you for your patronage. There's still one last chance. If I can't rely on money to solve the problem, it will indeed become more exciting. Meg let out a breath and pressed the start button again. The roulette wheel spun crazily. The names of the dishes flashed by one after another, dazzling him. Meg clenched his fists subconsciously and held his breath as he looked at the roulette wheel. The roulette wheel gradually slowed down and finally came to a stop. Ding! Congratulations to the host for drawing a high-grade recipe. Buddha jumps over the wall. Damn! Meg sat up immediately and looked at the recipe that had the words, Buddha jumps over the wall, written in golden light in his mind. Compared to the usual golden light, there was a hint of red in the light, making it even more dazzling. System, is this Buddha jumps over the wall really a high-grade recipe? Meg blinked his eyes and asked with uncertainty. Although his luck had always been good, it was only a 3% chance after all. When he really drew it, he felt that it was unreal. Buddha jumps over the wall is also known as full jar of incense and fortune, longevity, and integrity. It's a famous local dish in Fuzhou, Fujian. It belongs to the Fujian cuisine. It got its name because of the saying, when the jar of incense was opened, the aroma of meat spread all around. When Buddha heard it, he abandoned Zen and jumped over the wall. According to legend, it was developed by the owner of Fuzhou's Jutran Garden restaurant, Zheng Chuanfa, during the Qing dynasty. As one of the representative dishes of the Fujian cuisine, the deliciousness of Buddha jumps over the wall is widely recognized. It also has an extremely high position in the soup industry because it uses a rich variety of high-grade ingredients and perfectly blends the characteristics of the various ingredients. It becomes a delicacy with great deliciousness and high nutritional value. Therefore, Buddha jumps over the wall deserves its reputation as a high-grade dish. The system introduced seriously. Very good. I'm very satisfied. Meg's face was already full of smiles. He had eaten Buddha jumps over the wall before. However, at that time, he felt that it was just so. It probably wasn't too authentic. But now, the system had given him a recipe. Moreover, it was the modified version of the Otherworld Demon. If it could be classified as a high-grade dish by him, the taste would definitely not be bad. Of course, he was more curious about the special effects of Buddha jumps over the wall, which was classified as a high-grade dish. Mr. Meg, why are you so happy? At this moment, a voice sounded behind Meg. Come, wonderful bookhouse. Chapter 1064. Meg, who had just won the lottery, opened his eyes. He turned around and looked at Hill, who was standing behind him. He realized that he had been too immersed in the lottery and had let his guard down. I just had an interesting dream, Meg said with a smile. He stood up and looked at Hill. May I know why Miss Hill is here? If I say that I want to have a cup of tea with Mr. Meg, I wonder if Mr. Meg will agree? Hill looked at Meg with a smile. Since Miss Hill is already standing here, how can I refuse? Meg asked with a smile. He gestured to the seat beside him and said, The sun is just right today. Why don't we sit outside and drink tea under the sun? Sure. Hill nodded. She walked straight to the table and sat down. Meg went into the house and took out a tea set. He boiled the Yixing clay teapot on the small stove and sprinkled some black tea. The aroma of the tea drifted out of the teapot. Taking a light sniff would make one feel peaceful and comfortable. It was a winter morning and the sun was shining brightly. The two of them sat opposite each other with a cup of black tea in the middle. Neither of them spoke. He'll stare at Meg for a long time. He just looked at the Yixing clay teapot calmly. He didn't even look at her. She had seen many men who didn't look at her. However, those men just want to hide their panic, so they deliberately looked elsewhere. Their flickering eyes quickly exposed their thoughts. However, Meg was different. His eyes were calm and focused. It was as if there was something more beautiful than her on the Yixing clay teapot. Even looking at her was superfluous. She had never met such a man before. This guy, am I really not as beautiful as a teapot? Hill felt unconvinced. Although she didn't care about men's gazes, she was used to being stared at. Now that she was ignored, she felt uncomfortable. System, what are the effects of this Buddha jumps over the wall? Host, please explore by yourself. System, this high-grade dish is so powerful. Will there be any side effects? What if she gets sick from eating it? Host, please explore on your own and consider how to prepare the medicine dishes. What use do I have for you? Meg couldn't help but roll his eyes in his heart. What was the use of this system if it didn't answer his questions? This tea is quite fragrant. The Hill smiled and broke the silence. Unlike Meg, she did not have the leisure to sit here and bask in the sun all morning. Yes, it's good tea. Meg ended the conversation with the system and naturally took over the Hill's words. He lifted the teapot and poured a cup of tea for her. The tea was clear and beautiful, with a strong tea aroma. This was the Da Hong Pao from Wui Mountain that he had bought from the system. Naturally, it was a good tea, but there wasn't much of it. If it weren't for Mr. Hill's request, he wouldn't have been willing to share it with anyone else. Hill took the small white porcelain teacup. The fragrance of the tea made her eyes light up. Her grandfather loved both red wine and tea. In recent years, he had been fishing and drinking tea when he had nothing to do. She would also drink tea with him when she was free, so she knew a little about tea. Her grandfather's favorite tea was the Assam black tea produced in the Goblin's Assam Valley. Because the production was very small, it was not easy to buy. A few years ago, because he was unable to buy black tea once, he bought the entire Assam Valley in one go and built a tea base. He produced and sold his own tea and only provided for himself. Occasionally, he would give a little to his friends as a gift. The black tea, made by Mr. Meg, had a stronger aroma than the Assam black tea. She lifted the teacup and gently blew on it, then carefully took a small sip. This taste, the Hill's eyes lit up. The aroma was rich, and the taste was sweet and mellow. After swallowing, the lasting aroma lingered in her mouth, making her feel refreshed. Good tea. Even though Mr. Hill had tasted many good teas, she couldn't help but praise. Even her grandfather's favorite Assam black tea paled in comparison to this. Grandfather will definitely like this tea, Mr. Hill thought with certainty. Meg took a sip of tea, put down the teacup, and looked at Mr. Hill with a smile. Miss Hill, you're so busy. You're not just here to drink tea with me, right? Mr. Hill was a strong woman. She usually didn't come to the restaurant for meals. She would only appear here when she had something to do. The improvement work on the steam locomotive has been completed. However, during this time, Chief Engineer Blair has led the research and development team to try to add a magic array to the steam locomotive to increase its speed. Recently, there has been a breakthrough. However, there are some problems in practical use that can't be solved. I hope to get some help from Mr. Meg. Mrs. Hill looked at Meg and said, "A modified version of the train?" Meg was more surprised when he heard that. Mrs. Hill said apologetically, "These things are not within the scope of our cooperation. I'm sorry to trouble Mr. Meg. I don't know much about magic, so I may not be able to help much. However, I'm quite interested in this modified version of the train. I may not have enough time in the morning, but I can go there during the lunch break." Meg nodded. He didn't refuse, but he didn't say too much either. He was indeed curious about what would happen when technology met magic. A modified version of the train? Could its speed be close to that of a high-speed railway? Okay, someone will come to pick you up at noon today. Mrs. Hill smiled, then took out a piece of paper and placed it in front of Meg. This is a letter of appointment. I want to hire you as the chief consultant of the steam locomotive project. This way, if I need your help in the future, I'll feel less apologetic when I ask, Mrs. Hill said. Meg glanced at the 7-figure annual salary and pushed the letter of appointment back to Mrs. Hill. He smiled and shook his head. If I sign this, I'll feel more apologetic when I refuse in the future. Mr. Meg, do you think the salary is too low? No, I just don't like to be restrained. Meg shook his head. If I'm free, I'll be happy to participate in the steam locomotive project. After all, I'm also one of the shareholders. However, the premise is that I'm free. Mrs. Hill stared at Meg for a while, then put away the letter of appointment and said with a smile, "Then I'll have to trouble Mr. Meg." Mrs. Hill quietly finished the black tea in the teacup, put down the teacup, and asked curiously, "What kind of tea is this? How much do you still have, Mr. Meg? I wonder if you can sell me some. My grandfather loves tea, so he'll definitely like this good tea. It's just a little wild tea. There's not much left, so I can't sell it." Meg decisively shook his head and refused. The system had sold him less than a caddy of black tea, which was too little for him to drink. How could he sell it? However, according to the system, this was due to the first year of transplant cultivation. The output should increase in the following years. Chapter 1065. After watching the carriage leave on the hill, Meg poured himself another cup of tea. As he watched the steam rise slowly in front of his eyes, he squinted slightly and looked at a big tree not far away from him. A figure was leaning against the big tree and peeking in that direction. This person had been here for a while, and Meg quickly noticed him because he wasn't very professional. He was wearing a full set of black clothes and a hat in broad daylight. The only thing missing was the words, "I'm a spy," written on his forehead to indicate his identity. An enemy is here? Or is he targeting me to make a fortune? Meg raised his eyebrows. From a situation he sensed, it should be a human with a strength of about 6 tier. It was obvious that he was coming for him. There was too little information, and Meg couldn't deduce anything. That man in black stood behind the tree for a while before pulling down the brim of his hat and turning around to leave. Meg thought about it and didn't choose to follow him. A 6th tier strength couldn't even break through the automatic defense of the restaurant. What kind of threat could he pose? Since he came to scout during the day, he would most likely take action at night. In that case, he would wait until nighttime to see what he wanted to do. In a deserted alley, 3 men in black with black hats gathered together. One was tall and thin, one was short and fat, and the last one was a well-built man. "Boss, have you really scouted the place? We're going to make a big fortune this time. As long as we succeed, the 3 of us won't have to worry about anything," the thin man whispered. "Nonsense. When have I ever had a problem? As long as Fatty's information is correct, that restaurant really has a divine weapon that can make super delicious grilled fish by itself. We'll definitely succeed tonight," Colby said with a confident smile. "It's definitely correct. I saw the boss take out delicious grilled fish from that black divine weapon with my own eyes." Fatty nodded with certainty, and a nostalgic smile appeared on his face as he said, "That taste was really delicious. Furthermore, one fish costs 2,500 copper coins, and there are so many people ordering it. As long as we can get this divine weapon, we'll just have to lie down and collect money every day. Furthermore, we'll be able to eat delicious grilled fish every day. Eat, eat, eat. You're already as fat as a ball, and all you know is to eat." Colby patted the fatty's head, and a smile appeared at the corner of his lips. "When I have money, I want to drink the strongest alcohol and ride the wildest women." 1, 2, 3. After the lunch service ended, Meg looked at Gina, who was happily counting mud casings in the corner. He couldn't help but ask, "Gina, why are you collecting so many mud casings? Even if it's supper, you can't eat that much, right?" Gina stared at Meg for a while before she understood what he meant. She pointed at the mud casing and then at her mouth. She waved her hand, indicating that it was not for her to eat. She then gestured with her fishtail and said, "My clansmen, they eat." Meg spent quite some time to understand what Gina meant. It turned out that Gina had prepared these mud casings for the merfolk like her. It seemed like she wanted them to have the ability to breathe on land as well. However, Gina didn't even know where she came from, nor did she know where her home was. No matter how many mud casings she collected, she probably wouldn't be able to give them to her clansmen. Moreover, what made Meg more curious wasn't it good for the merfolk to live in the sea? There were no territorial disputes, and they were free. They also had an endless supply of fish. Why did they have to come to the mainland to fight for living space with other races? Big Sister Gina can't speak or write, but she can draw. Why don't we let her use drawing to communicate with us? Amy asked curiously as she walked over with ugly duckling in her arms. Oh, right. That's a good idea. Meg's eyes lit up. He actually didn't think of such a simple idea. Little kids could indeed find the simplest and most effective way. Meg passed a pen and paper to Gina, and then gestured as he said, Gina, if you have something to say to me, just use drawing. Simple daily communication could be carried out using body language. However, slightly more complicated conversations obviously couldn't be carried out using body language between races with completely different worldviews. Gina's eyes also lit up when she saw the pen and paper. She picked up the pen clumsily and quickly learned how to control her strength to draw lines on the paper without breaking the pen or tearing the paper directly under Meg's guidance. Everyone in the restaurant surrounded Gina curiously as she sat in front of the table. Everyone was very curious about Gina's background. However, due to the fact that they couldn't communicate with words, they still couldn't figure out where Gina came from and why she came after so many days. Gina thought for a while and then started drawing. Murlocs with human bodies and fish tails quickly appeared under her pen. They surrounded a circular platform that looked like an altar. In the center of the altar, there was an old Murloc in a long robe. He seemed to be presiding over some solemn and mysterious ceremony. Although it was her first time drawing on paper with a pen, Gina's drawing was surprisingly good. Although she reduced some details for the sake of speed, those simple lines still made people feel the solemnity of the crowded merfolk. There's so many merfolk. What are they doing? Are they praying for pies to fall from the sky? Amy asked curiously as she knelt on another chair and looked at the drawing. Looks like it's indeed a very big merfolk tribe. Meg was deep in thought. Although there were only a dozen merfolk drawn on the paper, there were more wavy lines that represented the crowded merfolk. Gina didn't explain. Instead, she quickly started drawing the second drawing. A beam of light appeared above the altar, and then a projection of an image appeared in the sky. All the merfolk had surprised expressions on their faces. Could it be a revelation? Elizabeth exclaimed softly with a look of disbelief on her face. A revelation? Everyone looked at Elizabeth curiously. What is that? Big Sister Elizabeth, Amy asked. It said that there's a supreme god on the Norland continent. Among the various races, the elves worship the god of life, the forest trolls worship the god of strength, and the orcs worship their respective totem gods. No one has seen God before, but there are occasional revelations. Hence, many people still believe in the existence of God, Irina explained. Gina couldn't understand their conversation and didn't explain. Instead, she started drawing the next drawing. The chaotic image of the revelation stopped, and a restaurant appeared on the screen. A young man was standing in front of the restaurant. Isn't that Father? In our restaurant? Amy exclaimed softly. Everyone looked at the painting in shock, their faces filled with disbelief. Isn't it just a slideshow? What's the fuss? The sister mumbled. Come. Wonderful bookhouse. Come. Chapter 1066. Meg looked at himself in the drawing, and he was a little confused. The distinctive black and white chef's uniform, the distinct outline of his face, the signature mustache, and the restaurant behind him with the sign Mamis all revealed his identity. The person in the picture of the revelation that Gina had drawn was indeed him. What's going on? Is the so-called God of this world the same as the heavenly axiom that brought him here? Or is he being targeted by other gods? Mag couldn't understand it, either. This was already beyond his understanding. He looked at the first picture again. The top of the altar was covered in layers of darkness, and it made him feel a little depressed. The mermaids' faces were also filled with anticipation and desire, as if they were praying for God to appear. After the revelation, the mermaids looked at him in the picture with ecstasy. It was similar to Gina's expression when she saw him for the first time. But what did this have to do with him? No matter how one looked at it, a chef like him did not look like a savior. Mag looked at Gina. He wanted to know what was going to happen next, or rather, what was the deeper meaning behind this revelation. Gina looked up at Meg and then continued drawing. The fourth picture quickly appeared under her pen. In this picture, Gina appeared. She was standing in a circular teleportation portal. The priest in a black robe and a middle-aged merman with a crown on his head were standing beside the altar. Further away, a black mass of mermen was surrounding the teleportation portal. They were looking at Gina, who was on the teleportation portal, with anticipation in their eyes. Is Sister Gina the hope of the entire village? Amy mumbled. It seems so. Meg was deep in thought. After looking at the 4 pictures, he roughly knew why Gina appeared here. The mermaids must have received a revelation from God to find the person in the picture. He was the chosen one that the mermaids were looking for. Gina was chosen as the mermaids' representative. She took the ancient teleportation portal and was very lucky to meet him. A mermaid who could not survive on land. Because of a mysterious revelation, the mermaid Princess Gina came ashore with a one-way ticket without any hesitation. What a foolish worship. Wasn't this taking their lives as a joke? What? Meg asked Gina. He still could not understand the mermaid tribe's actions. Isn't the sea good? Was it necessary to come ashore? Gina noticed Meg's confusion. She thought for a while and continued to draw on the paper. It was a black curtain that stretched across the sky, blocking all the light. One by one, the merfolk attacked the black curtain. Some were injured and fell. Some died directly in the black curtain, but none of the merfolk could break through the black curtain. Although it was just a still image, everyone felt a little depressed when they looked at it. What is that? Meg's voice slowed down as he asked Gina. Gina stopped writing and shook her head. She looked equally perplexed. However, she quickly picked up the pen again and continued to draw on the paper. The altar was activated, and she appeared in a desert. She walked carefully on the desert, but the smile on her face and the light in her eyes had never appeared in the darkness. The image changed, and she appeared in a barren valley. That was the location of her second teleportation. Although the surroundings were barren, and she had lost the water source on her, her expression was still bright. The image changed again, and she appeared in the restaurant. Meg, who was glowing with golden light, appeared again. He brought her back to life as if he was the savior. Do I have a golden light special effect in her eyes? Meg raised his eyebrows and tried not to laugh. Next was the image of Gina waking up. In the image, she had a happy smile on her face. However, there was a big bubble on her head that was filled with water. She did not seem to fit in with this world. The image changed again. Meg, who had a golden light special effect, was in the kitchen. He held a small wooden hammer in his hand, and there was an egg glowing with golden light in front of him. It's the beggar's chicken. Amy was the first to recognize it. What does it have to do with the beggar's chicken? Yabamiya did not understand. Gina should be able to breathe on land after eating the beggar's chicken, Meg said thoughtfully. He knew about this. As expected, the next image was of Gina eating the beggar's chicken with a piece of mud casing. The water bubble burst, and Gina was surprised to find that she had the ability to breathe on land. In the image, she opened her arms to embrace the world and revealed a pure smile. Everyone could not help but smile as well. They felt that they had been healed by this story. Gina did not stop writing. The image changed again. Under the dark curtain, the mermaids were still looking up with hope. They seemed to be waiting for something. Clack! Gina put down her pen and looked up at Meg. Her expression was similar to the mermaids looking up under the dark curtain. Her eyes were also filled with hope. The restaurant was silent. Everyone's gaze fell on Meg. It was a silent portrait, but it vividly showed a mermaid tribe struggling under the dark curtain. And all their hopes were placed on Meg alone. Father, why don't you make more beggar's chicken for them? They look so pitiful, Amy said softly, full of pity. Meg was not in a hurry to express his opinion. His gaze swept across the images spread out on the table. From the images, the mermaid tribe should be trapped under some kind of seal or curse at the bottom of the dark sea. Their location should be somewhere deep under the sea. There were no coordinates or specific depth. Although he already had the ability of a grade 7, he did not have the ability to dive deep into the sea, nor could he breathe underwater. It was even more impossible for him to make beggar's chicken for them at the bottom of the sea. Although he pitied Gina, he was indeed not a savior. He could not make any rash promises. This place, where is it? Meg asked Gina as he pointed at the first image. Lantite. Gina enunciated each word clearly. Lantist, Meg repeated after her. Although he did not know where this place was, the name of this place might be an important breakthrough point. There was a knock on the door. Mia went to open it and quickly shouted at the door. Boss, he said he's here to pick you up. All right, I'm coming. Meg responded. It seemed like Miss Hill's people were here. He kept the images that Gina had drawn and could not help but praise. Gina, it's a pity that you're not a cartoonist. Your drawing style and storytelling are all genius. Cartoonist? Gina repeated as she looked at Mag, perplexed. Chapter 1067. He's really a chef. The expressions of all the engineers became weird. Although the steam locomotive was designed by Meg, they still felt weird to have a chef guide their work. Meg knew what everyone was thinking, but he didn't care. He just couldn't be bothered to waste too much time here. If he rushed back now, he could still go to the information firm to check on Lantist. It seemed like Mr. Hill wasn't at the base, so he had to think of a solution himself. All right, thank you for making the trip. Blair took the sketch and arranged for someone to send Meg off. His gaze was completely attracted by the few drawings in his hands. Although they were sketches, the lines were marked strictly. Blair looked at them seriously, and his eyes gradually lit up. Did he really come up with constructive suggestions? The engineers couldn't help but think to themselves when they saw Blair's expression. These problems had been bothering them for many days, and they still hadn't found a substantial solution. Meg just came over to take a look, and he found a solution? Genius. Mr. Meg is really a genius. Blair praised. His hand that was holding the drawings couldn't help but tremble slightly. Chief, did he really think of a solution to the problem of derailment at the bend? An engineer couldn't help but ask. Blair spread the drawings on the table and waved to everyone. Not only the derailment at the bend, but also the inclination of the carriage and the improvement of the acceleration. Mr. Meg's suggestions were all spot on. Come take a look. The engineers gathered around and looked at the drawings on the table seriously. Reduce the magic array's energy appropriately. Lower the carriage's suspension height. Change the carriage's wheels to side wheels that are level with the ground, and separate the locomotive from the carriage to solve the problem of inclination after the carriage is lifted. The side wheels are used to ensure that the train doesn't derail and can reduce the resistance to the greatest extent. Most importantly, this improvement doesn't require the replacement of the train track. The method of separating the links can also be used for the links of the subsequent carriages. This way, the connection method will be more flexible. The soft links can also solve the problem of the long train being unable to pass through the bend. This is probably what a genius is. The engineers swept away their previous doubts, and only admiration and emotions were left in their eyes now. Blair looked at everyone with a smile and said, "The solution is out. Let's try to come up with a design plan that can be used today." As soon as the carriage reached the Aiden Square, Meg got off. "You could drop me off here. I want to take a walk." Lantist. I don't know if Gina's explanation is correct. The transliterated names of places are usually more deceptive. Meg went into an alley to change his clothes and put on a mask before walking towards an intelligence agency. 10 minutes later, Meg, who had gained nothing, came out of the intelligence agency and walked towards the second intelligence agency. Meg had visited almost all the intelligence agencies in the Aiden Square, but he still couldn't find any information related to Lantist. That place is either not on the Norland continent, or it's not called that in the common tongue of the continent. Meg couldn't help but sigh as he changed back into his clothes. On the way back, Meg passed by Case and Bookstore. As usual, he went in and picked up 2 books. When he paid the bill, he saw the old shopkeeper lying on a recliner, reading. Every time he came to see him, the old shopkeeper was reading in this position, but the books in his hands were different. "Boss, have you read all the books in this bookstore?" Meg asked curiously. Upon hearing his voice, the old shopkeeper, Kaysen, put down the book in his hand and sat up slowly. He looked up at Meg and nodded. "This is the 23rd time." "Then, have you seen the name Lantist in the book?" Meg asked casually. "Lantist?" Kaysen thought for a while before standing up and walking towards the bookshelf. "Really?" Meg, who was just asking casually, had his eyes lit up as he watched Kaysen skillfully take out books from the bookshelf before returning to the counter. The name Lantist was mentioned once in this book, thrice in this book, and 5 times in this book. Kaysen introduced them one by one. This is a fucking human flesh search system. Meg looked at Kaysen, speechless. After hearing what the old shopkeeper said, Meg pointed at the stack of books and said, "I'll take all of these. How much is it in total?" The shopkeeper counted the books and said, 15 books, a total of 620 copper coins. "Keep the change, thank you." Meg handed over 7 silver coins and carried the 2 stacks of books out of the door. The intelligence agency didn't get any useful information, so he didn't expect to find something in a bookstore. When he returned to the restaurant, Phyllis was sitting in the kitchen, cooking Yangzhou fried rice seriously. The colorful ingredients were flying around in the metal wok, just like a rainbow. Anna, an ugly duckling, were standing on either side of Gina, who was drawing at the table. Everyone was so engrossed that they didn't notice Meg's return. Meg didn't make a sound, either. He leaned forward curiously and stuck his head out to take a look. Gina was still drawing the underwater world, but compared to the slightly depressing style in the afternoon, the thing she was drawing now looked more relaxed and interesting. She used magic to create different colors of paint. She painted as she drew and presented the gorgeous colors of a watercolor painting. There were lights on the translucent fish's heads. Groups of jellyfish were messed up by the big fish. A mermaid with a steel fork sat on the fish's back. The grotesque underwater world was vividly portrayed by her pen. Meow. Ugly duckling looked at the schools of fish and swallowed its saliva. Gina was so scared that she shivered, and her pen fell to the ground. Meg bent down to pick up the pen. "Mr. Meg." Gina quickly stood up. "You drew very well," Meg said to Gina with a smile. This lady was indeed a genius in drawing. She had just learned how to use a pen, but she could actually draw such an eye-catching picture. Gina could tell that Meg was praising her. She said in the common language, "Thank you." "Who taught you the common language?" Meg asked curiously. He was almost tricked by her the other day. Big Sister Gina is very eager to learn. She would usually ask us to teach her some simple words, and she picked them up very quickly, Anna said. "I see. Then our Anna is a little teacher." Meg stroked Anna's head with a smile. "All right, you two continue drawing. I'll go upstairs to read for a while." Meg carried 2 stacks of books upstairs. He put the stack he bought at the side and took a book from the stack the shop owner gave him. He sat down and started reading seriously. Meg spent the entire afternoon reading through the stack of books. The Lost Place. Meg closed the last book, and a thoughtful expression appeared on his face. Chapter 1068. Just like what Boss Carlson had said, the name Lantist was indeed mentioned in these 8 books. Other than the names in 3 of the books that were probably made up, the other 5 books all mention Lantist. From the trivial clues, it could be inferred that Lantist was once a human nation on the Norland continent, but it had always kept a low profile. However, everything about Lantist suddenly disappeared over 1,000 years ago, as if it had been wiped out from the Norland continent. Even the records related to the same period had disappeared mysteriously. All the clues pointed to one direction. Lantist had been lost, and no one knew where it was. Gina claimed to be from Lantist, and the scene she drew was in Heidi. It seems like Lantist must have sunk back then and was sealed under Heidi. However, it gained the ability to survive in the sea because of that. This plot seems a little familiar. Meg stroked his chin and pondered. No one knew where Lantist went, but Meg found the approximate location of Lantist before it disappeared in the last book. The Endless Sea. Isn't that near the demon's territory? Meg stood up and looked at the map of the Norland continent hanging on the wall of the study. He used a pencil to draw a circle on the Endless Sea. It's a little far. Otherwise, I could bring Gina there directly to confirm the location. However, it seems like I have to wait for the rest day 2 days later to consider it. Meg turned and walked downstairs. Meg had some idea about Gina's background, but how to bring her there gave him a headache. Z speed was naturally the fastest, but it wasn't suitable to be exposed. During dinner, Meg told everyone about this news. Wow, then, can we help Big Sister Gina go home? That's so cool. Amy exclaimed in surprise as her eyes lit up. The endless sea is so far away. How long will it take to get there? Yabamiya said worriedly. Gina didn't understand their conversation. She only sat there quietly and looked at everyone. Elizabeth looked at Gina and said, "If you need, I can bring you there." That's great. Meg's eyes lit up. He had forgotten that Elizabeth was a grade 8 frost dragon. Although she was slightly inferior to Ozzy, her speed was definitely fast enough. Big Sister Elizabeth, can I go too? Amy raised her little hand and looked at Elizabeth expectantly. Yes. Elizabeth nodded slightly. Mia looked at Elizabeth expectantly. Anyone who wants to go can go, Elizabeth said calmly. That's awesome. We can finally get out of the city. Mia exclaimed in surprise. She had never left Chaos City since she was a child. A group trip? That's not a bad idea. Let's treat it as our restaurant's first team-building activity. 2 days from now is a rest day. Let's set off on that day. Meg suggested with a smile on his face. Yay. Amy nodded happily. Meg told Gina about the possibility of finding Lantis. Gina was stunned when she saw the circle on the map. She jumped up excitedly and gave Meg a big hug. It's just a possibility. We can't be sure that Lantis is really at the bottom of the sea. Meg removed Gina's legs from his waist to give her a heads up. After the dinner service ended, all the ladies went back. Gina also went back upstairs to the water tank. Meg looked at Anna, who was looking at the door with a melancholic gaze. He walked to her and squatted down. He placed his hand on her head gently and smilingly said, "Don't worry. He will come back." Anna looked at Meg's smile and felt a warmth in her heart. Big Sister Anna, if you're unhappy, you can come and pinch Ugly Duckling's chubby face. It's super comfortable to pinch. Amy walked over with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She pinched Ugly Duckling's face with her 2 little hands, turning it into a square and then into a round face. Hee. Anna looked at Ugly Duckling, who looked like it had nothing to live for, and couldn't help but let out a bell-like laughter. Then, she joined in to torture Ugly Duckling. All right, let's go upstairs to sleep. Meg looked at the little fellows who were having so much fun. He switched off the lights and led them upstairs. It's already closed. Big bro, should we start now? Fatty poked his head out from the bushes and whispered as he looked at the restaurant that had already turned off the lights. Colby shook his head as he stood on a tree branch and said, "Don't rush. Let's wait a little longer. We're here to steal something today. Let's keep a low profile and not get discovered." "Boss is wise," Skinny praised as he popped his head out from behind the bushes. Colby's expression became even more proud. He smilingly said, "After we steal that godly weapon, we'll leave Chaos City and go to Rodu. I heard the people there are richer and they like to eat. Let's make a fortune there." Fatty and Skinny also had a look of longing on their faces. The 3 of them waited outside for quite a while. The lights in the restaurant were already off, and it was very quiet. The boss seemed to have fallen asleep. "Let's go." Colby jumped down from the tree and crept towards Amy's. Skinny and Fatty quickly followed behind. Colby went to the door and pressed his ear against the wooden door to listen. Bam! A muffled sound rang out beside his ear, and he was so frightened that he stumbled and fell to the ground. Colby looked at Fatty standing in front of the door with a huge hammer in his hand. He stood up and kicked him on his butt and angrily said, "Damn Fatty, what are you doing?" "Boss, I was just trying to help you open the door," Fatty said innocently. Scram! Colby kicked Fatty aside. He only heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that there was no one around. With a stern expression, he warned, "Idiot, we're here to steal something. If we smash down with such a huge hammer, wouldn't the door be smashed into smithereens?" "Is this still stealing? This is robbery. We're thieves, so we can't do this." Yes. Boss is right." Fatty nodded fervently. However, when he looked at the wooden door that didn't even have a hammer mark, he couldn't help but mumble, "Why is there nothing wrong with this door?" Luckily, there's nothing wrong. Otherwise, you'd have to accompany them to another door later. Colby waved at Skinny. "Skinny, come and open this door." All right, I'm good at this. Skinny took out a metal bar from his head and went forward to poke at the lock on the door. Ding! The defense system has detected an enemy intrusion. Meg, who had just blow-dried the two little fellows' hair, looked at the surveillance footage that appeared in his mind, and a smile appeared on his face. Amy, who had changed in her teddy bear pajamas and let her hair down, looked at Meg curiously and asked, "Father, what story are you going to tell us tonight? Do you want to listen to a story before you sleep? Or do you want to play with a few stupid thieves for a while before you sleep?" Meg asked with a smile. Chapter 1069. Stupid Thieves. Amy's eyes lit up. She immediately grabbed Meg's hand excitedly and asked, "Where are they?" "Father, we're the stupid thieves." And also looked at Meg expectantly. "They're downstairs now. Let's watch them quietly." Meg brought the two little ones to the bedroom, turned off the lights, and then pulled open the curtains in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. They could just see three heads gathered at the entrance of the dining room. "What are they trying to do?" Amy asked in a low voice. "They want to come in. They're probably trying to steal something," Meg said with a smile. He had just heard them talking about a divine artifact. But how could there be a divine artifact in the dining room? This made him a little puzzled. These three guys probably didn't know his identity. Otherwise, they wouldn't be stupid enough to steal from Alex's dining room. Grandpa said that thieves are very abominable people. They hate work and want to reap without sowing. They'll do anything to steal other people's belongings. Anna looked at the three people below and said angrily, "Once, the remaining 10 copper coins we had were stolen by a thief. We slept in the snow for a night. Grandpa and I almost froze to death. How dare they steal Big Sister Anna's money? Those thieves are really bad. I'm going to destroy them with a fireball," Amy said angrily, and a small purple-gold fireball appeared in her palm. The thieves who stole Anna's money might not be the same as these three. Meg quickly grabbed Amy's little hand and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Besides, we're still in the room. Don't be in a hurry to release the fireball. Meg didn't like thieves either, but he still didn't know the motives of these three thieves. It seemed a little inhumane to send them to the sky with a fireball. "Then what should we do? Are we going to watch them steal from here?" Amy asked Meg as she withdrew the small fireball. "Grandpa said that if we can't beat them, we should stay away from the thieves," Anna whispered. "This is our home. If anyone should run, it should be the thief. We can't just watch them steal." Meg shook his head. After thinking for a while, his eyes lit up. "Why don't we decorate a haunted house to scare these three thieves and teach them a lesson?" Haunted house. Amy and Anna were confused. "Is this a vampire's house?" Amy asked. "Or the devil's house?" Anna asked. If this was the original world, these two could be considered haunted houses. However, in this world, they were not scary enough. After all, it was common to see vampires hanging upside down from the eaves when walking on the streets in Chaos City. As for vampires, Meg recalled the vampire countess that he had tied up with a tortoise shell, and all his fear of vampires disappeared. Meg thought for a while and said, "Neither. A haunted house is a house that will make people feel scared. It's the kind of house that will make people scream when they go in." Amy raised her little hand and said, "I know. That must be a house where a scary monster lives in the legends. Many brave warriors will go there to challenge it. Teacher Luna told me about this before. But which one of us looks like a monster?" Anna looked at Meg, then at Amy, and finally lowered her head to look at herself. She didn't look scary at all. "Oh yes, Big Sister Gina." Amy's eyes lit up, and she said, "If she turns into a mermaid, it will be a form that no one has ever seen before. If she dresses up weirdly, she will definitely scare people." "That's a good idea." Meg nodded. In Chaos City, all kinds of strange races could be seen, but mermaids were indeed a rare species. Gina might even be the only one on the whole continent. Her sudden appearance in the middle of the night, coupled with some lighting effects, should be quite scary. "System, can you rent me a set of the haunted house? The kind that can be used immediately. I'll return it to you after one night," Meg said in his heart. "Host, this system is a legitimate god of cookery cultivation system. Please don't call me casually for things that are completely outside the scope of my business." The system said righteously. How is this outside the scope of your business? System, this is within your scope of business in the first place. Think about it. To become a god of cookery in the limelight, it means that you have to accept challenges from all the chefs in the world. If your mental endurance isn't strong enough, you might jump into the sea because of a nasty remark from someone. Then, wouldn't you be unable to complete your mission? As a project that combines education with entertainment, the haunted house can train a person's mental endurance very well. Don't you think that we should let the god of cookery candidate try it out? Meg said with a serious expression. If you put it that way, I'm definitely not wrong. Moreover, I'm only renting it for one night. I'll pack it up tomorrow morning. It won't affect the restaurant's business at all. You can see how we should design it to suit the horror taste of this world. It would be even better if we add some advanced special effects. Let's use the 3 thieves outside as lab rats first. Meg smiled as he continued the system's words. The system was still a little hesitant. Then it settled. I'll pay 100 copper coins as a deposit first. If I'm not satisfied with the effect later, you don't have to return the deposit. I'll take it as a loss. Deal. Ding. 100 copper coins have been successfully deducted. The haunted house is being designed. The haunted house template will be out in 1 minute. All right, you can add Gina in as an element, Meg reminded with a smile on his lips. The system was still so silly. Meg knocked on Gina's door, and the door opened after a while. Gina pressed the 2 seashells against her chest and looked at Meg with her misty eyes. She asked with confusion, Mr. Meg? Meg glanced at the 2 seashells and the wet fishtail in Gina's hands and raised his eyebrows. Shocking. So mermaids can sleep naked too? Amy poked her head out from behind Meg and looked at the seashells in Gina's hands in surprise. Wow, Sister Gina isn't wearing any clothes? Anna also poked her head in and asked worriedly, Is this really okay? Gina woke up immediately when she saw the 2 little ones. She blushed and quickly closed the door. After a while, she opened the door again and came out. She had already changed into the school swimsuit. Gina, we need your help, Meg said as he looked at Gina and gestured. Gina's current state was not much better than holding the 2 seashells. The school swimsuit was the best. Help. Gina was confused. It's like this. Meg brought Gina to the window to look at the 3 thieves below. Then, he took out a pen and paper and started to formulate a battle plan. Calm. Wonderful book house. Chapter 1070. Brother, why can't I poke it in? Add some oil. Is it done? It's a little tight. It's still not working. You piece of trash. You can't even open a lock. Colby slapped the sweaty, skinny man away and went forward to take a look at the keyhole. The pitch-black keyhole looked no different from a normal keyhole. He took a thin iron rod and poked it in, but it stopped immediately as if something was stuffed inside. Who the fuck is so shameless as to stuff something into someone's keyhole? Colby said angrily. He went forward to take a look, but it was still pitch black. He couldn't see anything, and he didn't know what was blocking it. After poking around with the iron rod, he didn't make any progress. Colby, whose forehead was full of sweat, threw the iron rod in his hand onto the ground and said with a black face, Fatty, smash the door. Boss, didn't you say to keep a low profile just now? If this door is broken, who's going to compensate them? Fatty mumbled, not daring to go forward. Are you stupid? We'll run after stealing. Who's going to stay behind to compensate? Hurry up and smash this stupid door. Colby scolded. He looked around and said, Hurry up. The Grey Temple's patrol is coming. Oh. Fatty hurriedly went forward after hearing that. He held the hammer tightly with both hands, took a deep breath, and then smashed the wooden door with all his might. Bam! There was a dull sound. Fatty felt as if his hammer had smashed into a metal wall. A strong numbness spread through both his hands instantly. Then a rebounding force came from the hammer and actually flipped his huge body onto the ground. Ouch! Fatty couldn't help but cry out. He held his butt and wailed, My butt, it's broken into 2 pieces. There's not even a trace left behind. Colby stared at the wooden door. Fatty's hammer had landed solidly on the door. However, Not only did this seemingly thin wooden door not shatter into pieces, there wasn't even the slightest trace of being hammered on it. Although Fatty's ability was only 4th tier, even a 1st-tier knight could easily smash a wooden door with a punch. It didn't make sense that Fatty with a hammer couldn't smash a restaurant door, right? This door doesn't seem right. The skinny man also looked at the wooden door in shock. He reached out and knocked on the door. After confirming that there was no problem with the wooden door, he became even more confused. Boss, is it possible that the person living here is an expert? Why don't we just retreat? Fatty said fearfully. Bullshit. How can a chef be an expert? You must have eaten too much recently. You can't even use a hammer properly. Let me do it. Colby picked up the hammer from the ground, spread his legs, and got into a stance. He took a deep breath, raised the hammer high above his head, and smashed it hard against the wooden door. An almost inaudible ripple appeared on the wooden door. Before the hammer could land on the door, it was blocked by the silent light barrier. Swish! The hammer turned into a stream of light and flew backward, smashing into the bushes 100 meters away. Colby's mouth was open, and he was still in the posture of swinging the hammer. Boss, are you all right? The skinny man looked at Colby worriedly and said softly, Boss, I think this restaurant is really a little strange. Why don't we leave? Forget it. We won't steal this artifact. Yeah, even Boss's hammer flew away, Fatty said softly as he stood up. Bullshit. Colby stood up straight and hid his numb hand behind his back. He coughed dryly and said, I lost my grip just now. Otherwise, how could the hammer have flown away? It doesn't exist. Then we? The skinny man asked carefully. Of course we're going to fuck him up. I don't believe a stupid door can stop the 3 of us. Smash it. Colby took out his big sword and slashed wildly at the wooden door. Fatty and the skinny man were also encouraged. They also took out their weapons and slashed wildly at the wooden door. 10 minutes later. Boss, I can't take it anymore. I have no more strength. Fatty sat on the ground with his mace. His clothes were drenched in sweat, and he was panting heavily. I can't take it anymore. The skinny man sat down beside Fatty and threw the axe in his hand onto the ground. He felt that his hands were no longer his own. What the fuck? What kind of wood is this door made of? Why is it harder than iron? Colby also looked at the door in front of him in despair. The 3 of them had been slashing at it for half a day, but they couldn't even leave a mark on it. The 3 of them sat on the stairs with their backs facing the door, and their foreheads were drenched in sweat. Boss, why don't we leave? Yeah. Sigh, the 3 of them sighed together. They didn't expect to have such a bad start when they came to steal from a restaurant. It was really a blow to their confidence. There was an inexplicable sadness. Creak. Just then, the door behind them slowly opened outwards, revealing a gap. A gust of cold wind blew out, and the 3 of them shivered. Why? Why did it open by itself? The 3 of them turned around and looked at the half-closed wooden door in confusion. They had been slashing at it for half an hour, and they couldn't even leave a mark on it. How did it open by itself? Boss, what do we do now? Fatty stood up and swallowed his saliva. He looked at the door and felt an inexplicable sense of fear. He had a feeling that there was something like a ghost hiding inside. Boss, I think this is a little strange. We didn't manage to break the door open even after making so much noise, but it opened by itself now. No matter how I look at it, it looks like a trap, Skinny mumbled. I want to see what's so strange about this place that it dares to trick me like this. Colby sneered. He raised his sword and pulled open the half-closed door. It was pitch black inside the door. There wasn't a single ray of light, and even the moonlight couldn't shine in. The door was like the mouth of a giant beast. A gust of cold wind blew, and it went straight for their necks. Boss, why don't we change our target? Fatty said as he tugged at the corner of Colby's shirt, shivering. Follow me in if you're my brother. Colby flung Fatty's hand away and stepped into the restaurant. What should we do? Fatty looked at Skinny helplessly. What else can we do? We can't just leave Boss here. Skinny clenched his teeth and jumped into the restaurant with his eyes closed. Wait for me. It was dead silent outside the restaurant, and it was even scarier. Fatty shouted and jumped into the restaurant as well. Bam! The door behind them closed as soon as the three of them entered. Oh ho! The three of them looked back at the door behind them and let out a soft cry at the same time. Drip! Drip! The sound of water droplets falling to the ground could be heard. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 1071. Drip! Drip! The sound of water dripping onto the ground could be heard clearly from all directions. There seemed to be water flowing on the ground. A cold wind blew from somewhere and entered his neck. It was pitch black all around, and he still couldn't see anything. Boss, I'm scared, Fatty said nervously as he grabbed an arm. W, what are you scared of? Colby's voice came from the other side. Although he was forcing himself to be calm, there was still a slight tremor in his voice. Boss, this place is a little spooky. Where are you? Why can't I see you? The skinny man's voice came from a further place. Then whose hand is this? Fatty was stunned. He suddenly felt that the hand he was holding was a little too skinny. The skinny man was all skin and bones, but this hand felt like only bones. Don't be scared, I'm here. A ball of green light lit up and illuminated a delicate skull. The skull grinned at him and spoke gently. Fatty blinked and looked at the skeleton's arm that he was holding tightly. Ghost! Fatty screamed. He flung the arm away and turned to run. He hit the door with a clang and bounced back. He fell flat on his back. I'm here, brother. The skeleton man appeared behind him again and said with a smile, Don't come over. Boss, save me. Fatty was so scared that all the fats on his body were trembling. He crawled to the side and screamed for help. He had never seen a skeleton that could talk in his life. It was really too scary. Fatty, where are you? What are you shouting about? Colby's surroundings were still pitch black. He could hear Fatty's screams and was very close to him, but he couldn't see his shadow. The dripping sound became more and more urgent. Water dripped down and landed on his body like rain. Why is this broken house still leaking? Colby frowned and waved his hand. A drop of water landed on his lips, and he stuck out his tongue to lick it. Salty, he frowned. It didn't seem like rain. Moreover, it wasn't raining outside at all before he entered. This rundown house does seem a little strange. Colby gripped the long sword in his hand tightly. He was separated from Fatso and Skinny after he entered. Although he could hear their voices, he didn't know where they were. Fatty's scream was right next to his ear, but he couldn't tell where it came from. He didn't know what had happened to make him so panicked. Just then, someone patted him on the shoulder from behind. Skinny, you. Colby turned around, and his eyes widened. A pale face silently appeared less than a centimeter away from his face. Their eyes met. It was a pair of dead fish eyes that glowed with a dim light. The long hair that was draped over his shoulders was as messy as seaweed, dripping with water onto the ground. A strong stench assailed his nostrils. It was like a rotten fish, making him nauseous. What is it? Colby was shocked and instinctively swung the long sword in his hand forward. The figure disappeared in an instant, and the long sword slashed at empty space. The surroundings sank into darkness again. If not for the fact that the stench in the air hadn't disappeared, it would seem as if the previous scene had never happened. The water droplets grew bigger and bigger, and there was even a strong gust of wind. There was a strong stench in the wind, and the faint sound of waves could be heard. Don't try to act mysterious. Come out and fight with me if you're capable. What's the point of doing all this nonsense? Come out. Come out. Colby waved the long sword in his hand and slashed wildly in all directions. However, every slash hit empty space, and he didn't touch anything. How was that possible? This restaurant isn't big, and it's filled with tables and chairs. How is it possible that I can't hit anything? Colby's heart sank. At first, he thought that it was just a trick that mages used to scare those thieves who weren't skilled enough. However, it seemed that the situation wasn't as simple as he thought. On the other side, the scene before Skinny's eyes changed. He realized that he was already sitting on a small boat and drifting on the sea. It was pitch black all around, and the wind and rain were intertwined. The small boat was like a leaf that rolled up and down with the waves, as if it would be overturned by the next wave at any time. What is this? Didn't we enter a restaurant? Why are we in the sea? I don't know how to swim. Skinny grabbed the edge of the boat tightly and shouted frantically. Io. Just then, a cry of surprise sounded from above. With a splash, a fat and strong figure fell from the sky and landed on the small boat. The small boat shook and almost capsized. Fatty, why are you here too? Skinny asked softly as he looked at the person who had fallen from the sky onto the boat. Fatty, who was dizzy from the fall, opened his eyes when he heard the voice. He looked at Skinny, who was right in front of him, and hugged him. He cried, Skinny, it's great to see you. There was a skeleton chasing me just now. Daddy was scared to death. Yeah, it's too fucking scary. A voice with lingering fear sounded behind him. Fatty's expression froze instantly. He turned around and saw that skeleton sitting at the bow of the boat while patting his chest. Fuck you. The skinny man lifted his leg and kicked the skeleton man into the sea. With a splash, it was drowned by the waves without even a splash. Fatty was stunned for a while before he gave Skinny a thumbs up. He praised from the bottom of his heart, Skinny, you're really good. Give me a hand. My legs are wobbly, and I can't stand. Skinny retracted his leg and collapsed into Fatty's arms. What the hell is this freaking thing? It scared me to death. Give me a hand. Just then, a voice came from the sky again. Before Fatty and Skinny could react, a figure had already landed on them. The three of them lay on the boat to rest for a while. Boss, what should we do now? Why did we come to the sea? It's such a small boat. One wave is enough to capsize such a small boat. Fatty said in despair. He regretted suggesting to steal the roasted fish divine artifact now. Why did the restaurant that looked so normal during the day turn into such a freak at night? Colby looked around and said in a low voice, Don't panic. This must be a magic caster's trick. As long as we look carefully, we will definitely find. Splash. Before Colby could finish his sentence, a huge wave came crashing over, and the seawater splashed onto the three of them. This water is salty. This is real seawater. We're doomed. This is the real sea. The boat is flooding. Quick, drain the water away. Fatty and Skinny exclaimed as they frantically scooped up the water with their hands. Colby looked at a head with disheveled hair that appeared on the surface of the sea, and the muscles on his face twitched. Again. Ah, this is so fun. Give me 2 more basins of water. I want to splash it again. Amy and Anna each hugged a bucket of water and laughed happily. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1072. This is too interesting. Meg raised his eyebrows and looked at the 3 terrified thieves squatting on a small wooden boat in the middle of the empty hall. The system used 3D projection to create a vast ocean. At the same time, it used 5D technology to make the wooden boat sway and flip along with the scene. The special effects of the skeletons and water ghosts from before also gave Meg a scare. The ingenious combination of reality and illusion created an even more terrifying atmosphere, even though there were no real ghosts. Of course, after removing all the special effects, the performance of the 3 thieves squatting on the boat was indeed very comical. It completely met Meg's psychological expectations, especially when he saw the 2 little Lolas smiling from ear to ear while holding the buckets of water. Meg's mood became even more joyous. Let the storm come more violently, Meg said in his heart. The storm became more and more violent. Huge waves came one after another. The small wooden boat creaked from the waves as if it would disintegrate at any time. Colby and the other 2 held onto the edge of the boat tightly and screamed along with the frequency of the boat's sway. They now completely believed that they had been teleported to the ocean and were extremely unlucky to have encountered a huge storm. The 3 of them were landlubbers who had never been in the water. If the boat capsized, they would all die. Of course, what scared the 3 of them the most was not the violent storm, but the heads that appeared one after another on the surface of the ocean. The wet hair was like seaweed, and the pale faces looked especially ferocious under the occasional flash of lightning. Pairs of scarlet eyes stared at them. The stench of blood drifted over slowly, as if there were many rotten fish around them. Mamma mia! What the hell is this? I'm so scared. Fatty's screams had already started to tremble. I'm scared too. Splat. A hand clasped onto the edge of the boat that he was holding tightly. A white skeletal head popped out of the water and said with the same terrified expression, "Again." Fatty jumped up in shock. The wooden boat, which was already swaying, shook violently and almost capsized. "Don't leave me behind." The skeletal man screamed and jumped out of the water. He opened his arms and hugged Fatty tightly. All the bones in his body were trembling. "Go down. Get down." Fatty screamed and jumped on the spot, trying to get rid of the skeleton man. However, the skeleton man stuck to his body like a sticky candy. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get rid of it. It even screamed along with him, its voice incomparably mournful. Slap! Another soft sound was heard. A rotten hand grabbed the edge of the boat, and a rotten head slowly popped out of the water, trying to climb onto the boat. "Fatty, don't move. The boat was about to capsize. Don't let those disgusting bastards come up." Colby kicked the fat man back into the boat and swung his sword to slash the rotten corpse that had half of its body crawling out of the water back into the water. Shrill cries could be heard as those water ghosts crazily swarmed towards the small boat, clinging onto the sides of the boat as they climbed up. The three of them looked terrified as they frantically brandished their weapons, trying their best to kill the approaching water ghosts. However, there seemed to be no end to the number of water ghosts. No matter how hard the three of them tried, there were still water ghosts charging at them from all directions. A thick sense of despair and fear enveloped the three of them. If they were given the chance to choose again, they would definitely not dare to take half a step into the restaurant. "Mommy, I was wrong. I know I was wrong. As long as I can go back alive, I will definitely be a good person." The fat man closed his eyes as he waved the big stick in his hand wildly, crying and shouting at the same time. "I won't steal anymore. I won't steal anything anymore." The skinny man was also in tears. He was on the verge of breaking down as he was being stared at by those pairs of red eyes after killing the endless water ghosts. "Come out and fight with me if you dare. What's the point of releasing these ghosts?" Although Colby's face was also pale, he still appeared calm. Only his slightly trembling hands revealed the fear in his heart. He had traveled extensively all these years and had seen many big scenes. He really didn't expect to capsize in an inconspicuous restaurant. The huge waves crashed against the small boat, and there were also endless water ghosts swarming towards the small boat. Even he didn't have much confidence that he could leave this sea alive. "Little Amy, wrap the kelp on the cabbage properly before throwing it out. Otherwise, it won't be good if you throw it out naked and scare people. Anna, increase the power of the fan by a notch. Oh yes, sprinkle some chili powder as well. Just follow the direction of the wind." Meg sat in the middle and calmly gave out orders. He was in a good mood as he watched the three stupid thieves struggling on the small boat. They dared to steal from him. If he didn't punish them properly, it would be a waste for them to come here. The wind and rain gradually stopped, and the waves also slowly calmed down. A bright moon rose from the sea. The water ghosts screamed and turned to dive into the sea, disappearing without a trace. Is it finally over? Exhausted, the three of them sat on the boat, panting heavily with lingering fear in their hearts. It was quiet all around. The bright moon's reflection on the sea surface was tranquil and peaceful. Dirty ba 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 la la. A beautiful singing voice came from afar. The voice was so sweet, as if an angel was singing beside their ears, comforting their frightened hearts. "Who's singing?" The fat man raised his head, and there was a hint of confusion in his eyes. What a beautiful voice. The person singing must be a beauty. The skinny man also stretched his neck and swayed his head along with the singing voice. "In that direction. If there's someone, we might be able to leave this place." Colby pointed in a direction and picked up the oars. "Leave this place." The fat man and the skinny man's eyes lit up as well. They quickly picked up the oars on the boat, and the three of them worked together to row in the direction of the singing voice. The singing voice became clearer and clearer. Although they didn't understand the meaning of the lyrics, The melodious singing voice seemed to have a magical power that made them immerse themselves in it. They only wanted to get closer and even forget the meaning of getting closer. They didn't know how long they had been rowing. In a faraway place, a reef suddenly emerged from the water surface. On the reef, there seemed to be a woman sitting cross-legged. The singing voice was coming from her. The boat got closer and closer, and the trio's gazes became blurry. They rowed mechanically and stared at the woman on the reef in a daze. What a beautiful person! Although her back was facing them, and her thin clothes couldn't cover her graceful figure at all, her singing voice was so beautiful. Even the cold seawater became warm. It was the feeling of being in love. The shore wasn't far away, and they were about to leave this sea of suffering. And on the reef, there was a beauty welcoming them. All the suffering they had suffered earlier seemed to be not worth mentioning at all. Under the passionate gazes of the trio, the beauty with her back facing them slowly turned around. Book Guesthouse Reading Website. Chapter 1073. The beauty on the reef slowly turned around and smiled sweetly at the three of them. Her beautiful face made the three of them forget to breathe. So beautiful! The three of their expressions brightened up immediately. Crack! At that moment, the small wooden boat seemed to have hit something and made a cracking sound. It hit the reef. The boat is flooding. Fatty was the first to react as he exclaimed. A huge hole appeared at the bottom of the wooden boat. Seawater kept gushing in and covered their feet in an instant. The boat began to sink. At that moment, the singing stopped abruptly. The beautiful face of the beauty, smiling at the three of them on the reef, shattered like an eggshell and fell off. She turned into a ferocious and terrifying monster. She stood up and turned into a rotten fishtail. Her bones and sharp claws were exposed. She pounced at the three of them on the boat. "It's a fish demon!" The three of them exclaimed at the same time. All their beautiful fantasies were shattered at that moment. The feeling of fear was even more intense than before. They instinctively slashed the weapons in their hands at the fishermen. Clink! The long sword, iron rod, and axe were almost broken into two at the same time. The three of them looked at the fishtail, slamming down on the boat in despair. Bang! The boat was instantly shattered. The fishtail slammed on their faces. It was as if they were hit by a giant beast. The three of them felt dizzy and sank to the bottom of the sea in despair. "We're dead this time." That was the last thought in the three of them before they completely fainted. "Am I really that scary?" Gina, who was standing on the table, looked at the three of them who had fainted from fright. She shrugged her shoulders embarrassedly, removed all the mud on her face, and put away her colorful fishtail. "All right, system. You can stop the special effects now," Meg said in his heart. He turned on the lights in the restaurant and looked at the three idiotic thieves who were lying limp in the middle of the restaurant. He smiled. It was indeed better than doing it himself. "Ha ha ha, this is so fun. Why don't we splash the three of them with ice water and do it again?" Amy was holding a bucket of water and was eager to try. "Isn't this a little too cruel?" Meg raised his eyebrows. He couldn't bear to see the three of them squealing like pigs being slaughtered. No punishment is cruel to a thief. Anna was also carrying a bucket as she shook her head firmly. Meg thought for a moment and felt that Anna's words weren't unreasonable. He smiled and nodded. "All right, then do as you please." For the next hour, her screams echoed in Amy's. Her hoarse screams made one's heart ache and want to laugh at the same time. "All right, that's all for today. You two should go to sleep." Meg stopped the two little fellows who wanted to wake up the three fainted thieves again and shook his head. "I'm so tired." Gina yawned. She was woken up from her sleep. At first, she thought it was fun, but later, she felt that the three of them were too cowardly. They were jumping left and right in the room, screaming. The more she looked at them, the more bored she became. "Okay." Amy put the bucket on the ground, still wanting more. "Then, how should we deal with these three thieves? Should we just find a place to bury them?" Anna asked Meg. "We've already punished them today. There's no need to kill them. Just throw them out." Meg shook his head with a smile. It seemed like Anna really hated thieves. Even a girl with such a good personality wanted to bury them. Meg opened the door and dragged the three thieves out of the restaurant. He threw them into the bushes outside, clapped his hands, and went back in. The door closed. With the three of them, they wouldn't be able to break through the restaurant's defense even if they tried their best. "All right, go to sleep. I'll clean up the restaurant," Meg said to the three of them and asked them to go upstairs first. "Host, are you satisfied with the haunted house's service this time? If you are, please pay for the props and service." "The total is 15,000 copper coins," the system's voice said. "Overall, it's okay. However, these Western tricks can't compare to our Chinese haunted houses." "I didn't feel any fear the whole time." Meg shook his head and said casually, "Is that so, brother?" Just then, the lights in the restaurant suddenly dimmed. A pair of cold hands gently landed on Meg's shoulders. Meg turned around and saw a hideous skull sneering at him. "Whoa!" Meg was shocked and jumped 3 meters away in an instant. "Stop, stop, stop!" Looking at the long-haired evil spirit that walked out from the darkness like a zombie, Meg quickly raised his hand and shouted. This system seemed to be getting harder and harder to trick. It actually let him experience it himself without saying anything. The lights came back on, and everything returned to normal. Mag cleared his throat and said, 299 copper coins per go. "I can't go any higher. I don't want these props from you, so keep them for yourself. If I need them again, I'll rent them from you. This is a long-term deal." "Fuck. Host, how can you bargain like this? Didn't we agree to cut the price by half? You're cutting it by 50 times. The system's angry voice sounded and the lights began to dim again. "Don't try to scare me. Otherwise, I'll chop your equipment into scrap metal. I know the principles of these things very well. How can you scare me?" Meg curled his lips and said calmly, "I'll give you a chance to bargain, but don't try to ask for too much. If I'm not satisfied, I can refuse." The lights came back on. The system was silent for a long time and said weakly, "Add another copper coin, and the deposit won't be refunded?" "If the deposit isn't refunded, can it still be called a deposit? That's called an advance payment." "No, at least half of it should be refunded to me." Meg shook his head. Ding! 250 copper coins deducted successfully. The system's cheerful voice sounded as if it had earned a few hundred million. "When you're collecting the props, help me restore the restaurant to its original state." Meg's lips curled up and turned to walk upstairs. The two little fellows were tired from playing and had fallen asleep on the small bed. Meg walked to the bedside and covered them with their blankets. He changed into his pajamas and lay on the bed. Then he opened the Buddha Jumps Over the Wall soup experience bag. A huge amount of information surged into his mind. The amount of information was much more than any of the previous dishes. A dish of Buddha Jumps Over the Wall soup required 18 main ingredients and 12 supplementary ingredients. After being processed and mixed separately, they were placed in layers into a Shaoxing wine jar. It took a few hours of cooking to achieve the best effect of Buddha Jumps Over the Wall soup. It seems like it's not easy to make this Buddha Jumps Over the Wall soup well. I've only eaten this Buddha Jumps Over the Wall soup once. I shouldn't have made any blind comments, right? Meg mumbled and pushed open the door to the test field for the god of cookery. When Meg opened his eyes, he was standing on the edge of a 100-meter tall wall. The system's voice sounded. "If you're a man, then challenge the 100-meter tall Buddha Jumps Over the Wall soup." Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1074. What the heck? Mag retracted his leg that he had just extended halfway. His body swayed, and he almost fell off the cliff. "System, what the hell is this? You were trying to murder your own father." Meg struggled to maintain his balance at the edge of the cliff. He looked at the small pool below and couldn't help but roar in his heart. "Host, please watch your words. Even if we might be father and son, can you call yourself my father every time you open your mouth? Don't I care about my reputation?" The system said seriously. The corner of Mag's mouth twitched. He couldn't bring himself to say the words that were at the tip of his tongue. He coughed softly and said, "Then tell me, what's with the Buddha Jumps Over the 100-meter wall challenge? I just came here to learn how to cook. What's with the Buddha Jumps Over the Wall? Also, whose house's walls are so high? Do you think all monks are giants?" Meg shun. 201611. 11 from a distinguished super VIP member. What bullshit Buddha jumps over the wall? In the future, chefs who want to learn this dish should first experience the 100-meter Buddha jumps over the wall. They should know what kind of taste a monk needs to climb over the wall. Otherwise, they shouldn't hang the words Buddha jumps over the wall in gold on their door. How embarrassing. Picture cannot be viewed. Retweets. 1 million comments. 150,000 likes. 99 A screenshot of Weibo appeared in Meg's mind. The first comment. The 18th generation successor of Buddha jumps over the wall. I hope you become a chef in your next life and experience the 100-meter Buddha jumps over the wall. The second comment. I strongly support the person above. Likes 300,000. The third comment. Is there anyone who likes my scolding marong now? Likes 250,000. Meg. What the heck? There was really nothing he could say. Looking at the top comment, Meg's eyes were filled with tears. Was this a prophet? Sooner or later, he would have to pay for what he did. Meg had a deep understanding of this sentence. System, this is just something I did when I was drunk. Don't take it seriously. Let's remove this broken wall and talk things out. There's nothing that can't be resolved. Meg coughed dryly and looked down at the pool. It looked like it was only about 10 square meters. Looking down from a height of more than 100 meters, it looked like the mouth of a small bottle. After all, he was not a professional diver. If he really fell from a height of 100 meters, he would become a pile of meat paste. Although this was the test field for the god of cookery, and even if he died, he could save and restart. However, with the degree of simulation of the test field for the god of cookery, the pain would not be reduced at all. Host, please complete the 100-meter tall Buddha jumps over the wall as soon as possible. After 30 seconds, the height of the wall will increase by 10 meters, and it will increase by 10 meters per minute. The system said solemnly. Mag raised his eyebrows as he looked at the countdown timer that was already flashing and said, All right, I can jump, but you have to make that puddle bigger. Have you ever seen anyone using such a small puddle for 100m diving? Isn't this a scam? Host, please pay attention to your words. The system warned sternly and continued. According to the system's calculations, a 3x3 pool is enough for the host to dive alone. A depth of 15 meters is enough to reduce the impact of the dive and ensure that the host will not die from this dive. Countdown, 10-9. The system ignored Meg and entered the countdown timer. Damn! After taking a deep breath, Meg tried his best to calm himself down. He recalled the movements of professional divers in diving competitions that he had seen live before. He closed his eyes and adjusted his breathing. 3, 2, 1. He bent his knees and leaped forward with faith. With his legs tightly shut and his posture straight, he looked somewhat like a diver. The wind whistled past his cheeks. Meg's eyes were fixed on the small pool below. It was enlarging at the speed of the naked eye. It looked like there was no problem at all. In his mind, he had already started to recall the pressure of God's splash technique of the Dream Team. Then, you're dead. Mag stood by the high wall and blinked his eyes hard to get rid of the memories of him falling to his death by the shore. Then, he roared, That's right. System, fuck your mother. Do whatever you want. I count down 10, 9, 8. Fuck your mother. Meg once again made the leap of faith, but this time he did not choose to land on his face. He did not care about whether his posture was elegant or not. Instead, he chose to put his feet down. He had already thought it through. Even if he did not jump into the pool, he would not die again, even if he was injured. Crack. Your foot is broken. You can't focus on the culinary trial with a broken leg. Please challenge again. Good luck. Standing by the high wall for the 99th time, Meg looked at the small pool below and smiled contemptuously. He did not wait for the countdown to start and jumped in directly. This kind of thing was like throwing rings. If you aimed at one, you would most likely not be able to catch it. If you threw it blindly, you're dead. With a huge splash, Meg jumped out of the water for the 101st time. He swung his elegant hair and smiled contemptuously. Isn't it just 100 meters? Congratulations to the host for completing the 100-meter Buddha jumps over the wall. In view of the host's outstanding performance, The 150-meter Buddha jumps over the wall experience mission has been unlocked. Do you accept? Ha ha! Well, the wind today is so noisy. It's time to seriously cook the Buddha jumps over the wall. Meg turned around and left. What kind of bullshit experience mission was this? Did they think he was a fool? Meg turned around, and the high wall and pool disappeared. The scene changed, and Meg was already standing in the middle of a sealed kitchen. Other than a few soup pots and an ochre-colored Shaoxing old wine jar on the stove, everything else was the same. Can the authentic Buddha jumps over the wall really make a monk give up his meditation and climb over the high wall? What kind of delicacy could give him such courage? Or could it be that he was originally a monk who would not be happy without meat? Meg thought curiously in his heart. After looking around, Meg walked to the front of the fridge and started to check the various new ingredients that had just arrived. There were a few more compartments in the fridge. There were dried abalones, cucumbers, fish bones, fish lips, flower mushrooms, scallops, pigeon eggs. 30 ingredients filled up a lot of space in the fridge. Fortunately, the fridge was big enough, and each ingredient did not take up a lot of space. The natural advantage of the system's automatic replenishment was fully displayed at this moment. Boiling 30 ingredients in one pot is really a technical job. I hope I can get out of here before tomorrow morning, Meg thought in his heart. He opened the fridge and started to take out the various ingredients. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1075. The water temperature is too low. Abalone foam failed. The timing of changing the water is not right. Shark fin foam failed. The broth concentration is not enough. Failure. Failure. Faced with a series of failures, Meg was already able to remain calm. He summed up his experience and continued to immerse himself in it. Learning to cook was undoubtedly a dry and boring thing, especially when he had to repeatedly practice the same step for the sake of subtle differences in taste. It was even easier for him to break down. However, Meg's willpower had been trained to be incomparably tough in the past few months. A small setback could not make him back down at all. Instead, it became his motivation to improve, urging him to use the experience in his mind more seriously and perfect every step. The calendar on the wall flipped day by day. Different ingredients were processed in the soup pots, and finally, they were added layer by layer into the old Shaoxing wine jar that emitted a strong aroma. Woo-woo-woo. Colby shuddered and woke up. He opened his eyes and paused for a moment before getting up from the ground. He instinctively reached for his long sword and looked around with a terrified expression. He did not touch the long sword, but the scene around him stunned him. The endless ocean had disappeared, and so had the endless water ghosts. The house, the trees, the square, the familiar scene, and the restaurant not far away. What's going on? Could it be that everything just now was a dream? Colby was stunned. He moved his body, and the ice shards on the ground fell. The bone-chilling cold made him shiver again, and it also made him completely awake. No, it's not a dream. We were thrown out. Fatty, Skinny. Colby looked around and dragged Fatso and Skinny, who were about to turn into ice cubes, out from the bushes at the side and slapped them awake. Don't eat me. I'm very fat, and I taste terrible. Fatty waved his hands and shouted, not daring to open his eyes when he woke up. All of you go and eat Fatty. Fatty has a lot of meat. I don't have any meat on me. Woo-woo-woo, don't eat me. Skinny was not much better. He cried and shouted, and it was obvious that he had broken down mentally. All right, we're out. There are no more ghosts, Colby said loudly as he slapped both of them. The two of them stopped talking immediately. They hesitated for a moment before opening their eyes. They looked at Colby, who was standing in front of them, and then looked around. After making sure that they were standing on the ground of the Aiden Square, they burst into tears at the same time. Oh my God, I'm finally out. I don't want to be a thief anymore. It's too scary. Grandmaster, please bless us. I'll be a good person from today onwards. I won't do anything bad. Thank you for saving us. The fat man and the skinny man cried as they mumbled. They were filled with the joy of surviving a disaster. It seems like the artifacts in this restaurant are indeed very valuable, Colby said thoughtfully as he looked at Amy's. Boss, you can't be thinking of going in again, right? Fatty asked in fear. The situation is tense. Retreat. Colby waved his hand, turned around, and left without any hesitation. The fat man and the skinny man scrambled to catch up. They didn't even dare to look for weapons. Bastard. Who was that fella that day? How dare he knock me out, kidnap my prey, and ruin my mood? How despicable. In a black, ancient castle, the Countess was sitting on a high chair. She smashed the wine glass in her hand onto the ground, and fresh red blood splattered all over the floor. Madam, we haven't gotten any concrete information so far. Caesar took a careful glance at the Countess and lowered his voice as he said, but judging from the news that we heard, Princess Irina should have been to Chaos City that day. Do you think it's possible that Irina... Camilla's voice went up a few notches, and a tinge of fear flashed across her eyes. Some memories that she couldn't bear to recall suddenly came to her mind, causing her cold and elegant face to blush slightly. It can't be her, right? Isn't she busy with some free-for-all battle now? How could she appear in Chaos City? Camilla shook her head with uncertainty in her voice. She recalled that woman who suddenly appeared at the door that day. Although she was against the light and was wearing a veil hat, she did look a little like her when she smacked down with the chair. Besides, even if it's really her, why would she appear there? For that man, or for me? Camilla frowned. You were smacked against the wall, and it took me a long time to get you down. Caesar said softly. Shut up. Camilla glared at him with a frown and said, What's so good about that man? Apart from being a good cook, he's not bad looking, and he's good at tying things up. He's a little handsome when he's holding the whip. Those don't count. Why would Irina come specially to look for him? Could it be that she came to eat? Caesar guessed. No, it's definitely not that simple. My instincts tell me that there's definitely an unspeakable secret between the two of them. Camilla shook her head with a smile. As long as I can find out what's going on between them and pass the evidence to Miss Gloria, his true colors will be exposed. Miss Gloria will be heartbroken and will definitely run into my arms. I'm indeed a genius. Madam is wise. The boundless sea realm, Lantist at the bottom of the sea. Countless merfolk gathered in front of the altar. High Priest, Princess Gina has left for many days, and a new batch of nether vortexes is forming. According to the monitoring, it's bigger than any of the previous ones, and will engulf Lantist in a month's time. If we still can't find a way to leave the seal, the children and the elderly might not be able to survive the nether vortexes this time, an elder said, loudly, with a worried expression. Upon hearing that, the merfolk all looked horrified. Don't panic, everyone. There are indeed more nether vortexes this time, and the scale is bigger than before, but it's not to the extent that it can destroy Lantist. The High Priest raised his hand, and after the crowd gradually quieted down, he continued, Gina has already gone to look for the Chosen One. Since she's still alive, it means that she has already found him. Lantist will be rescued very soon. The god will bless us. Phew. Meg opened his eyes and instinctively turned to look at the alarm clock beside the bed. The time was exactly 6 o'clock. He let out a sigh of relief and secretly rejoiced that he had finally reached the system standard. He sat up from the bed. Although he had been cooking Buddha jumps over the wall in the test field for the god of cookery for dozens of days without sleep, he was still full of energy when he woke up. He walked to the bed and covered the two little fellows with the blanket that they had kicked off. They must be exhausted after fooling the 3 thieves last night. After washing up, Meg rushed downstairs excitedly. He opened the fridge, blinked, and couldn't help but ask, System, where are my wings and fish lips? Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1076. He had made Buddha jumps over the wall thousands of times last night, but he hadn't tasted it yet. Although this dish had been upgraded by the system, it still required an entire day to cook it. Therefore, Meg had already decided to start cooking this morning. He would officially launch the first dish of Buddha jumps over the wall at night. Of course, The most important thing was that he could make another delicious dish for Amy. However, when he opened the fridge excitedly, he realized that there were no shark's fins and shark's lips. The rest of the ingredients were all prepared, except for these two. System, did you run out of stock? Meg frowned. Important notice, because the shark's fins are from the nether sharks that live at the depth of 15,000 meters in the boundless ocean, the funds are limited and the deep-sea fishing ground has not been established yet. Therefore, the shark's fins and shark's lips cannot be supplied directly. The system replied, as an ingredient supplier, this behavior is very unprofessional. Meg raised his eyebrows, feeling that something was wrong. Without the shark's fins and shark's lips, Buddha jumps over the wall was equivalent to missing two very important ingredients. Wouldn't he have learned this high-grade dish for nothing? Due to a problem with the supply, a new mission has been triggered. Host, please find a supplier of the nether shark's fins and shark's lips. Gather the ingredients needed for Buddha jumps over the wall and establish a stable supply chain. Mission reward, 0, 5 physical strength. Mission failure penalty, night level drops by 3 levels. Mission clue fragments provided. Nether shark's coordinates +1, nether shark's picture +1. The system's voice sounded again. A world map appeared in Meg's mind. In the boundless ocean, there was a red dot and a picture of a huge shark with huge teeth and vortex-like patterns on its body. Fuck. System, how can you push the blame to others like this? You're obviously too weak, and now you want me to catch a shark. Moreover, it's at the depth of 15,000 meters. Aren't you messing around? Meg looked at the map and picture in his mind and couldn't help but curse. The duration of this mission is 3 days. Host, please complete the mission as soon as possible. Good luck. Fuck you. I drowned in the sea in my previous life. This is malicious revenge. I object. I refuse. Meg couldn't help but roar in his heart. Ever since he had drowned in his previous life, he had been very resistant to the sea. Wasn't this mission specifically designed to make things difficult for him? Objection overruled. The 3-day countdown begins now. At the same time, a 72-hour countdown appeared in Meg's mind. This is really... Meg rubbed his eyebrows. His mood suddenly turned bad. He had a map and a target, but the problem was, how was he going to catch a shark that looked very ferocious at a depth of 15,000 meters? Even someone as strong as Alex was still unable to withstand the water pressure at the bottom of the sea at 15,000 meters. Mr. Meg, good morning. At this moment, a sweet voice sounded from behind him. Gina. Meg's eyes lit up. He almost forgot that there was a mermaid from the bottom of the sea beside him. Gina, I have something that I need your help with. Meg walked out of the kitchen and took a pen and paper from the counter. He gestured for Gina to sit at the side while he sat beside her. He started to draw according to the nether shark in his mind. Mr. Meg, what do you want me to do for you? Gina looked at Meg curiously. When she saw the huge shark under Meg's pen appear and start to draw whirlpools on its body, her expression changed instantly. She exclaimed softly, Nether shark. Gina, you know what this is? Meg lifted his head in surprise. He had only wanted to try his luck, but he didn't expect to hit the jackpot. How do you know about the nether shark? Is this God's will for you? Are you going to start saving Arlantis Island? Gina grabbed Meg's hand agitatedly. When she saw Meg's confused face and realized that Meg didn't understand what she was saying, she didn't know what to do at that moment. Meg didn't expect Gina to be so agitated after seeing the nether shark. She mumbled a bunch of things, but he didn't understand a single word. He pushed the pen and paper in front of her and gently said, Don't be anxious. If you have anything to say, just draw it. Gina's eyes lit up. She picked up the pen and drew a cross on the paper. She divided the page into 4 equal squares and started to draw on the squares. In the first square, the mermaids were living peacefully. The mermaids' children had smiles on their faces. In the second square, a huge black whirlpool appeared behind the mermaids. A huge shark was looming in the whirlpool. In the third square, the mermaids were running away in a panic. A mermaid mother pushed her child away, but she was bitten into 2 by the huge shark. There were swirl markings on the shark's body. In the fourth square, many mermaids were attacking the huge shark crazily. However, after the huge shark's tail was cut off, it quickly grew a new tail, causing the mermaids to suffer a great loss. So this is a type of pest. Meg looked at the four-square cartoon. It seemed like the mermaids were also harmed. These brutal nether sharks should be the natural enemies of the mermaids. However, Meg's eyes lit up again when he saw the nether shark's regenerated tail. It actually has the ability to regenerate its body. It's simply the perfect ingredient. It's like a leek that I've harvested again and again. Gina took out another piece of paper and continued to draw. In that drawing, Mag was holding a cleaver and was like a divine soldier descending from the heavens. He killed the nether shark with one slash and was revered by countless merfolk. After putting down the pen, Gina looked up at Meg with hope in her eyes. Meg looked at the last drawing. He didn't expect Gina to have such an image of him. However, he definitely couldn't go to the bottom of the sea and kill that shark with a kitchen knife. Otherwise, he wouldn't have drowned back then. However, no matter how ferocious it was still just a shark, since he was on Mamie's list of ingredients. Even if it was a peerless, ferocious beast, it could still eat him and turn him into a protected animal. Mag went upstairs to retrieve the map. Then, he drew the coordinates on a piece of paper according to the system's markings. The system marked a central point and, at the same time, gave him a wide range. Within this range, nether sharks could appear. However, Meg had a bold idea now. Could this area be where Lantis was? Tomorrow, we will go there and send you home. Meg pointed at the spot on the map with a smile. Home? Gina didn't quite understand. Lantis, you're home, Meg said as he pointed at the circle. Back to Lantis. Gina's eyes lit up with tears. Chapter 1077. Gina looked at Meg with tears in her eyes. Her heart was filled with excitement and gratitude. She secretly made up her mind. After all my people leave the cursed land, I am willing to marry Mr. Meg to repay his kindness to Lantis. Meg continued to ask, Gina, how powerful are these nether sharks? How are they compared to you? After that, Meg asked about the nether sharks in detail. After Gina's drawing, he had a rough understanding of the nether shark's abilities. According to Gina, there were many nether sharks in Lantis, but they only appeared once or twice a year. Their abilities were determined by their size, and their numbers varied. The abilities of giant nether sharks were comparable to a 10th-tier mermaid powerhouse. However, every time a group of nether sharks appeared, there would at most be 3 giant nether sharks. A small nether shark's abilities were close to a 5th-tier mermaid's, while a medium one was close to a 7th-tier mermaid's, and a large one was 8th tier or 9th tier. Other than the nether shark's terrifying recovery ability, the most troublesome thing for mermaids was the extremely destructive nether vortex outside their bodies. It had a strong defense against mermaid magic, but once a normal mermaid was attracted by the nether vortex, they would temporarily lose their ability to control magic and would be at the mercy of the nether sharks. They are indeed very difficult opponents in the deep sea. They're the natural enemies of the mermaids. Meg was deep in thought. One of the reasons the mermaids wanted to leave was to avoid the nether sharks. It seemed too cruel to ask them to help hunt for the nether shark's fins and lips as ingredients. After all, one of the main reasons they looked for Meg was to ask him to help them deal with those nether sharks. Gina, let me think about how to deal with the nether sharks first, Meg said to Gina. Then, he began to flatter the system in his heart. System, there's probably no one in this world who is more professional than you when it comes to building a deep-sea fishery. What should we do to deal with such a troublesome shark? You have found the right person to ask the system about rearing magical beasts. According to the system's rearing experience, if something is not obedient, it will be obedient after a beating. If it is still not obedient, it means that the beating is not harsh enough. The system's voice was filled with pride. You're just wasting your breath. Meg rolled his eyes. If those nether sharks were so easy to deal with, the merfolk tribe wouldn't have suffered so much. I need something more practical. We need someone to build a reliable shark fin and shark lip supply company for me. Who would risk their lives for you if there are no tangible benefits? This system has once captured 3 nether sharks for research. If the host is willing to let this system have a stake in the supply chain, this system will hand over the research data to the host for 30% of the shares. You really don't want to lose out at all. Meg pursed his lips, thought for a moment, and nodded. You can invest if you want, but you can only get dividends. You can't participate in any of the operations of this supply chain. Deal. The system readily agreed, and a set of information was quickly transmitted to Meg's mind. Nether Shark Breeding Feasibility Report. Meg looked at the report in his mind and raised his eyebrows. It looked quite professional. Other than the system, there shouldn't be anyone in this world who would study the possibility of breeding a clan with a 10th level ability just to obtain shark fins and shark lips. Meg opened the information and read it quickly. The expression on his face also became a little strange. How is this a normal study? This was simply dissecting. Even Meg, who was not an animal conservationist, felt a little creeped out when he saw the experiments and data recorded by the system. Heat resistance, cold resistance, skin resistance, muscle flexibility, maximum regeneration speed, minimum time limit for reharvesting, decibel tolerance limit. These were the results obtained through physical experiments. Moreover, every nether shark in each group had been tested at least 10 times to avoid the appearance of accidental data, including a 10th level nether shark. Scientists were indeed scary. Meg raised his eyebrows. He finally had a deep feeling in his heart. Dissecting them for research was nothing. Conclusion. Nether sharks are a type of aquatic product with extremely high breeding value. Its lips and shark fins are the most perfect ingredients for Buddha jumps over the wall. They have extremely high nutritional value. A deep-sea fishery can be established to carry out deep-sea breeding. The nether shark's unique innate skill, the nether vortex, is formed by the magnetic field in its head. It has strong cutting ability and can also create a strong magnetic field interference to water attribute magic. This will make water attribute magic ineffective and easily destroy the fishery. Solution. Set up a strong magnetic field around the fishery. Adjust the frequency to make the magnetic field of the nether shark ineffective and remove the nether vortex. Nether sharks are very aggressive and have a fixed migration route. They will not stay in a fixed area for a long time. Solution. After the nether sharks are lured into the fishery, use ultrasonic waves to control the nether sharks within the range of the fishery. Break their migratory habits and start rearing and taming them. System. When it comes to growing vegetables and rearing meat, other than Yuan Longping, I only admire you. After reading the entire paper, Meg couldn't help but give it a thumbs up. He couldn't help but admire it. Since you already have a plan, you should have prepared the materials to set up the magnetic field, the blueprints, and the ultrasonic wave machine, right? As a partner, it's time to show your sincerity, right? Meg said with a smile. Sorry, I don't have enough funds. The system sent a rolling eye emoji. If this system had money, would it even be your turn? It's something that can be solved with a few slides. As a system, it's so embarrassing to scam the host's money every day. Don't other systems give the host money every day? Meg said sarcastically. Those hosts will be dissected and live cross-dressing if they don't complete their missions. Meg raised his eyebrows and coughed. All right, let's continue to talk about the equipment. Tell me, according to the number of nether sharks in Atlantis, how much would the equipment cost? This is the only nether shark tribe on the Norland continent. There are a total of 3,500 nether sharks. Among them, 2,000 are small nether sharks, 1,200 are medium nether sharks, 280 are large nether sharks, and 15 are giant nether sharks. According to past statistics, the number of nether sharks that pass through Lantis patrol route is about 1/3 of the entire tribe. Judging from the current situation in the deep sea, the number of nether sharks will increase this year. They will enter Lantis border 3 days later and enter the merfolk's territory a month later. After feeding on the merfolk, they will officially embark on their migration route. If we want to catch all the nether sharks that enter Lantis territory and rear them in captivity, we will need a fishery of 3,000 square kilometers and a large number of fish to feed. All the equipment costs 120 million copper coins, and the daily feeding costs 300,000 copper coins a day. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1078. Meg, an investment of 120 million and a daily operating price of 300,000 copper coins. Meg almost laughed. System, are you trying to scam me? Meg rolled his eyes. Using 120 million to build a deep-sea fishery and spending 300,000 copper coins to operate it every day just to make a serving of Buddha jumps over the wall. Was he stupid? Host, as the god of cookery, any price is worth it to make a perfect delicacy. Money is just a worldly possession. You can't bring it with you when you're born, and you can't take it with you when you're dead. Why take it so seriously? Isn't bringing happiness to your customers the most important thing? The system advised earnestly. No, my happiness is the most important thing. Meg shook his head resolutely. What comes from sheep's back? Why do you have to worry so much? As long as the price is reasonable, you don't have to pay a single cent for the operating expenses. The system continued to encourage him. Do you really think this is a miracle drug? A serving of shark's fin and shark's lips can make a serving of Buddha jumps over the wall. It can fit about 10 servings. Do you want me to sell it for 20,000 copper coins per serving? If it's 20,000 copper coins, the host will be making a loss. The other ingredients for a serving of Buddha jumps over the wall for one person will cost 1,000 copper coins, the system added. Meg rubbed his forehead and shook his head. This won't work. Mag lifted his head to look at Gina, who was sitting opposite him with her hands propping her chin up. His eyes lit up, and he said, System, you said that a sufficient number of ultrasound-releasing machines could form an enclosed fishing ground to rear the nether sharks. By the same logic, I can use ultrasound to build a shelter for the weak merfolk to hide in. Will the cost be much lower? I don't need to catch all the nether sharks in one go. I only need to find a closed canyon and rear 100 small nether sharks and 10 medium-sized nether sharks. Based on the principle that the harvest time limit is 10 days, I can harvest 11 servings of nether shark's fin and shark's lips every day. That's enough to supply the restaurant and reduce the rearing cost at least. Now, calculate how much money you need to invest according to this plan. The system was silent for a long time before saying, according to the plan provided by the host, the system has done a strict calculation and obtained the final data. The cost of building a sanctuary is 20 million copper coins, and the cost of building a small fishery is 15 million copper coins. The total cost is 35 million copper coins. Okay, you can start preparing all kinds of equipment. It's best if it's fully automatic and doesn't require any operation. Meg nodded without thinking too much. This time, he had saved more than 80 million yuan. The frugality was very successful. 35 million copper coins was indeed not a small sum, but fortunately, he still had more than 1 billion in savings after receiving the re-education fees from the 3 red dragons. Of course, Meg was more interested in the reward for completing this mission. 1 body attribute point. 35 million copper coins in exchange for a single point of strength. It was simply too worth it. Now that the system no longer gave him the opportunity to purchase strength points, if he didn't seize this opportunity, who knew when he would be able to return to level 8? Meg wasn't in a hurry to tell Gina the news. She was a good lady, but ultimately, he still had to do business with Lantis. Not everyone in the merfolk was as kind and pleasant as Gina. He was already prepared for a difficult negotiation with a race that had a 10th-tier powerhouse as the ingredient supplier of his restaurant. Don't worry, Gina. There will be a way. Meg consoled Gina, who had confidence in himself. Gina nodded. She felt very at ease when she saw Meg smile. After everyone arrived at the restaurant, Meg announced a piece of news. I'm going to send Gina home tomorrow. If I'm not wrong, Her home should be at this location, Meg said as he pointed at the circle on the map. The Boundless Sea Realm. That's the territory of the demons. However, this location is quite far from the Demon Islands. I've never heard of a place called Lantis here, Elizabeth said with a slight frown as she looked at the location that Meg was pointing at. Meg said calmly, I found this after going through a lot of information. It should be the most likely location. No matter what, let's go and try. Okay, I can send you all there tomorrow. Elizabeth nodded. Can I go too? Yabamiya asked softly. Of course. Elizabeth nodded. That's great, sister. Yabamiya hugged Elizabeth immediately and stopped in time. She exclaimed in surprise, Sister Elizabeth, if it's at sea, do we need to prepare a boat? Then we can go fishing or something. We can even barbecue the fish on the boat after we catch them. That would feel great, Barbara said thoughtfully. But who knows how to make a boat? Amy asked as she raised her hand. Everyone looked at each other and shook their heads. If there's wood, I might be able to make a simple boat. Just then, Phyllis, who was standing in the corner, raised her hand and said softly. Everyone looked at Phyllis in unison, and their eyes lit up. That's great. Then we can sit on the boat and grill endless fish, Amy exclaimed in surprise. Everyone's faces were also brimming with happy smiles. Everyone was smiling except for Meg, who had a melancholy look on his face. The sea. Why is it filled with water? Meg felt that he must have suffered from accident syndrome after he drowned in his previous life. Now, whenever the sea was mentioned, he would feel a sense of blockage in his heart, let alone go fishing in the sea. If I hadn't gone fishing for those D***MN crabs in my previous life, I wouldn't have drowned in the sea. Meg muttered in his heart. No, that's a misconception. Even if you hadn't gone fishing for the king crab that day, you would still have died. It's just that the way you died could have been the plane you took crashed, sunburned to death while tanning, drowned in a bath, choked to death while eating steamed buns, fell into a cement mixer, buried alive by a landslide, eaten alive by a lion. In any case, you would have died anyway. The system said calmly. If the heavenly axiom wants me to die at midnight, then I definitely won't live past midnight? Meg raised his eyebrows. If that was the case, drowning in the sea didn't seem too bad. Only by facing your fear and overcoming it can you become stronger and truly become a flawless god of cooking, the system encouraged. Scram. Meg rolled his eyes. It was easy to say, but how could it be so easy to actually do it? Seeing that everyone was in high spirits, Meg adjusted his state of mind and said with a smile, All right, then let's set off tomorrow morning to send Gina home. It's also our restaurant's first official team-building activity, a winter trip to the endless sea. I'll grill fish for you all. Come, wonderful book house. Come. Chapter 1079. Lantis. In a hall filled with huge stone pillars, a merman in armor looked at the black-robed high priest standing in front of a crystal ball and respectfully said, High priest, the migration of the residents at the border has already begun, but the underground castle can only accommodate the residents of the capital city. The underground castles of normal small cities might not be able to withstand the nether whirlwind this time. Should we report this matter? Have you confirmed the number of nether sharks this time? The high priest asked as he looked at the crystal ball. According to the reports from the front line, there are already 5 giant nether whirlwinds this time, about 100 large hurricanes, and about 800 small and medium hurricanes. This is an unprecedented nether whirlwind tide. The merman's voice was filled with despair. The nether whirlwind was the most powerful opponent that Lantis had to face after its sinking. In the beginning, the mermen were helpless against that indestructible whirlwind and became food for the nether sharks. However, it was fortunate that Lantis was rebuilt with the help of the high priest and the king. The mermen began to have a scale and strategy to deal with the nether whirlwind. However, every year, when the nether sharks appeared, Lantis still had to pay a heavy price to survive this month of darkness. After a month, the nether sharks would leave and disappear into the vast sea. They would then appear again a year later. This cycle had already been going on for thousands of years. In the history of Atlantis, there had been a few times when the number of nether whirlwinds increased tremendously. 300 years ago, 3 giant nether sharks led hundreds of nether sharks of various sizes to invade. The underground city of Atlantis' capital city was breached, and the high priest and crown prince of the empire died in battle. The casualties of the ordinary mermen were uncountable, and this time, the number of nether sharks was even more than the worst time in history. Although Atlantis had over 10 10th-tier powerhouses led by the high priest and hundreds of thousands of merman warriors, they could only feel despair in the face of the whirlwind that was immune to magic. No, let them all move back to the capital city. The crystal ball in the high priest's hand lit up with a blue glow, and simple images of underwater towns appeared on the surface of the crystal ball. The nether sharks love to clean up the small towns one by one. There are too many nether sharks this time. None of the small towns can last more than a month. That merman shook his head as he looked at the high priest and said, "But, high priest, if all the merfolk were to move into the capital city would have to face the nether cyclones directly this time. Given the number and power of the nether cyclones this time, we won't be able to stop them outside the capital city." Once the capital city is breached, Atlantis might be completely annihilated. Even if we leave them outside, with the strength of this nether frenzy, the capital city will still be destroyed. The high priest slowly raised his head, and a ray of light fell on his deeply wrinkled face. His grayish-white eyes were filled with helplessness. "High priest." The high priest interrupted the mermaid's words and said calmly, "Pass down the order. All mermaids are to withdraw into the capital and prepare for battle. Report the situation of the nether sharks and mobilize everyone. If we want to survive this nether frenzy, every mermaid has to do something." "Yes," that mermaid replied loudly with a stern expression. Then he turned around and left quickly. "God, you gave us instructions, but you didn't tell us how to survive. As your loyal believer, please save Atlantis." The high priest's chanting reverberated in the hall. Veril Town. As a border town in the northwest of Atlantis, one could clearly see the arc-shaped black barrier as soon as they raised their heads. It was dark and heavy in the sky, as if it would fall down at any time. This place was 350 kilometers away from the border of the barrier, and it was rich in a type of small fish called crescent fish. This was a fish that was only the size of a thumb. In its transparent body, there was a small crescent-shaped, glowing yellow bone on its head, hence its name. This was one of the favorite foods of the nobles in the capital city of Atlantis. It wasn't very expensive, but in Atlantis, where resources were scarce, it was enough for many mermaids to gather here and catch crescent fish for a living. "Duel, hurry up and pull the net. I caught so many crescent fish." A thin and weak mermaid chased after a school of shiny crescent fish. An equally thin and weak young mermaid swam out from behind a big rock. Then he swung the fishing net in his hand out forcefully and suddenly swam towards a school of fish, catching all the crescent fish that couldn't turn around in time. "So many. That's great." The mermaid went forward and exclaimed in surprise when she saw at least 100 crescent fish in the fishing net. Her eyes were also sparkling. "It's just so little. Do you have to be so happy? I'll bring you out to catch big fish in the future. One of them is worth 100 of these small fish." That young man called Duel glanced at the small fish in the fishing net with disdain. He raised his head and looked at the black barrier in the sky. "I want this sky." The young girl snatched the fishing net and pursed her lips. "Not only is this sky covering your eyes, it's also covering the big fish. We'd better catch crescent fish obediently. As long as we catch 5,000, Uncle Bartles will bring us to the capital city, and we won't have to stay here anymore." Speaking of the capital city, the young girl's eyes lit up. She heard that it was a big capital city that was 100 times, no, 1,000 times more prosperous than Veril. She couldn't imagine how prosperous it was. The biggest place she had been to was Block City, which was about 150 miles away from Veril. In the past, when the terrifying Nether Hurricane came, the people of Veril would go to Block City to hide. Thinking of the Nether Hurricane, the young girl's face turned pale. 8 years ago, their parents died in the mouth of the giant shark in the hurricane. She couldn't help but grab the young man's sleeve and said, "Duel, Uncle Bartle said that, right?" "Yes, that fatty has already agreed to us." Duel nodded and pursed his lips unhappily. "How much does it cost to go to the capital city?" "This fatty asked for 5,000 small crescent fish from us. We can at least earn half of it. It's okay. As long as we can enter the capital city, we won't have to worry about the Nether Hurricane anymore." A smile appeared on the young girl's face. Seeing the smile on the young girl's face, Duel's expression gradually turned cold. He turned back to look at the dark distance and clenched his fists. "I will kill those bastards sooner or later." "Definitely." "All right, the grill, condiments, and ingredients are almost all brought. It should be enough to cook seafood." Meg checked the kitchen utensils and nodded. He turned back and saw Gina coming down from upstairs with a small mountain of mud casings on her back. "Are you going to bring some local specialties home?" Chapter 1080. Gina carried 2 piles of mud casings that were tied together with ropes on her shoulders. They were stacked layer by layer like 2 small hills. Everyone waiting in the hall on the first floor was stunned. The golden mud casings were obviously the mud casings of the beggar's chicken. Usually, Gina would keep the mud casings carefully and put them upstairs. They didn't expect her to carry them all out today. It seemed like she was going to pack them up and bring them away. "I will bring some back for them to eat." Gina noticed everyone's expression and made an eating gesture embarrassedly. "All right, you obtain the ability to breathe in the air after eating this mud casings. If they can obtain the ability to breathe and leave the seal, it could be considered as finding a way out for Lantis." Meg nodded. Although he felt that this was a little too much, he could still understand Gina's feelings. After helping Amy put on a rabbit hat, Meg looked at everyone and said, "Since everyone is ready, let's set off." Wait a minute." Gina raised her hand embarrassedly and pointed upstairs. "There's still a little more." "Then go ahead." Meg waved his hand. Then, everyone watched as Gina carried the mud casings back and forth more than a dozen times. The stacked mud casings and bags of crushed mud casings were stacked up into a small hill. "Do we have to bring all these away?" Meg looked at the small hill with a headache. There were at least 500 kilograms of mud casings here. The key was that they were too big, and it was extremely inconvenient to carry them around. Gina obviously saw Meg's dilemma. After hesitating for a long time, she gritted her teeth and picked up a small bag of crushed mud casings from the side. "Is this enough?" Meg's eyes lit up. "If it's too much, we don't have to bring this big bag," Gina said as she gestured. "Meg." At this moment, Elizabeth went forward and waved her hand. All the mud casings on the ground disappeared instantly. "It's gone." Gina was shocked and started searching everywhere anxiously. "This is my space ring. I can help you bring these things over," Elizabeth said calmly as she flashed the silver ring on her finger. Everyone looked at Elizabeth's ring in surprise. Space rings were not common. "Actually, I have a spatial bracelet too." Barbara showed off the red bracelet on her wrist and casually swiped it. "It can probably fit the entire restaurant." As a spatial magician and the princess of the Moon Nation, having a spatial bracelet was nothing special to her. She had no use for it at all. This is a must-have for traveling. Meg's eyes lit up when he saw Elizabeth's ring and Barbara's bracelet. He then pushed the kitchen utensils in his hand towards them. "Take mine too. Let's go." Everyone was ready. With a wave of his hand, Meg walked out. A huge frost dragon rose from Chaos City. It flapped its wings and flew toward the southwest. "Ah, I'm flying." Meow meow, Yabamia's screams and ugly duckling's aggrieved cries rang out, and everyone burst into laughter. Not only Yabamia, but Barbara and Gina were also leaving the city for the first time since they came to the restaurant. They sat on the dragon's back and looked down at the continent with curiosity on their faces. Meg became their guide and introduced them to the mountains, rivers, and basins. Big Sister Barbara, what does the moon look like? Amy asked curiously. Everyone was also looking at Barbara curiously. What did the moon look like when they could see it every night? This was indeed a very curious question. The moon. It's full of pits. Barbara shrugged and said, we live in those big pits and build towns. We usually don't leave the sinkholes casually because there are very strong sandstorms outside. Even a 10th-tier powerhouse could be blown away. The moon is indeed full of pits. The natives are actually hiding in the pits. That's really surprising. Meg was deep in thought. Everyone laughed along the way. Only Gina stood in front quietly and looked ahead nervously, but her eyes were filled with hope. Although everything in the restaurant made her forget to go home, she still remembered her mission as the Princess of Lantis. Saving Lantis was her mission, and it was also her destiny since she was born. She had found the chosen one, and now Mr. Meg was sending her home. She had the tinder that could change Lantis' fate. Hope. It was something that Lantis didn't dare to hope for many years. This moment was within reach. After flying over the mountains and rivers, the vast ocean appeared in everyone's sight. The sea breeze brought the moist smell of the ocean and made the ladies who saw the ocean for the first time very excited. So, other than the countless pits, there really is an ocean in this world. Barbara opened her mouth wide, and her expression lit up as she looked at the endless blue ocean. So, this is what the ocean that Her Highness was talking about looks like. I didn't expect to have the chance to see it, but Her Highness... Phyllis was surprised, but there was also a tinge of worry in her eyes. The sea. What Grandpa said was true. The sea is at the end of the continent, but the journey is much further than what Grandpa said. No wonder we couldn't reach it, even after walking for so long. Anna blinked her eyes as if she wanted to take in the beautiful sea. This is the boundless sea realm. No one has reached the end of this ocean, and no one knows what is on the other side of the ocean. However, in the depths of the ocean, there is a demarcation line. The other side of the demarcation line is listed as a forbidden area. Those who cross the demarcation line can never return, including 10th-tier powerhouses. Elizabeth's voice sounded. A forbidden area that even 10th-tier powerhouses can't set foot in. Meg was curious. What was on the other side of the demarcation line? Elizabeth carried everyone across the surface of the ocean and gave them some knowledge from time to time to broaden their horizons. The location on the map should be around here, Elizabeth said as she hovered above the surface of the ocean and looked at the blue ocean below. So, Lantis is here. Gina also became excited. She had the urge to jump in as she looked at the blue ocean. The boat is done. Just then, Phyllis's voice sounded from behind. A 20-meter-long wooden boat was already completed on the left wing of the Frost Dragon. The wind blade had completed the most perfect cutting, and there was no gap left after the wooden boat was pieced together. Let's go down. Elizabeth swooped down. When she was close to the surface of the water, she flapped her wings gently, and the wooden boat landed on the surface of the ocean steadily. The silver light swept everyone up, and they landed on the boat. Wait! Before Meg could say the second word, he was already standing at the bow of the boat. His body swayed, and he fell straight into the ocean. Calm. Wonderful book house. Chapter 1081. All the girls landed on the wooden boat. The sharp-eyed Anna was the first to discover that Meg had fallen into the water. She exclaimed, "Uncle Meg has fallen into the sea. Father!" Amy shouted anxiously as she ran to the side of the boat and tiptoed to look down. Boss should know how to swim, right? Yabamia also looked around anxiously. Then, she pointed at a slowly sinking figure in the water and said, "There! Boss doesn't know how to swim. He's sinking." Gina tore off her sailor suit and dove into the water. A rainbow-colored fishtail appeared. She transformed into a mermaid and swam toward Meg. Meg seemed to hear screams again. He even forgot to struggle. Or rather, his body became stiff as soon as he entered the water. He could only open his eyes wide and watch himself sink slowly. The feeling of suffocation came, but this time he didn't feel much panic in his heart. Don't tell me I'm drowning again. Meg himself felt that it was a little absurd. However, his vision had already started to blur. He knew that this was a sign of complete loss of consciousness. In his line of sight, a huge shadow was rapidly approaching him. Its sharp teeth were already bared. It was obviously a huge shark. Fuck, system, Daddy is going to die again. Meg's eyes widened a little. He tried to regain control of his body. His fingers moved, but he still felt powerless. 48 Malawian Quatches enhanced torpedo aimed. Ready to fire. 3, 2. A line of small, almost invisible words flashed through Meg's mind. A megalodon had already swum to less than 10 meters away from Meg. It opened its bloody mouth, and its eyes were glowing red. Such food was not common to it, but it was sure that it was more nutritious than those small fishes. It also looked clumsier. After eating it, it should be able to fill its stomach. Don't hurt him. A sharp voice came from the bottom of the sea. A mermaid with a trident in her hand fell from the sky and crashed into the huge megalodon. The golden red trident easily pierced the megalodon's head and slammed it down. Scarlet blood burst out in an instant, dyeing the water red. In his daze, Meg saw a ferocious-looking mermaid swimming towards him. She hugged him and swam towards the surface of the water. Why do I feel like I've seen this plot somewhere before? Meg felt a little dizzy, and his legs instinctively wrapped around her. Host, crisis averted. Launch canceled. Another line of words floated by. Boom. There was a huge splash on the surface of the water. Gina leaped out of the water with Meg in her arms and landed back on the wooden boat. Everyone looked at Meg, who was clinging onto Gina like an octopus, with a strange expression. Father, are you all right? Amy asked worriedly as she ran over to Meg, whose eyes were tightly shut. Amy? I didn't die. Meg came back to his senses after coming out of the water. When he heard Amy's voice, his fingers moved, and he felt as if he had grabbed onto something soft. The familiar feeling jolted him awake. Could it be that he had saved and returned to the moment he transmigrated? Then, he opened his eyes and saw Gina's blushing face. Meg was stunned. Then he saw where his hand was grabbing. Her round and full breasts were tightly wrapped by the school's aqua, but he had kneaded them into a strange shape. As for himself, he was like an octopus that was wrapped around her body. How could this be? His mind stopped working for a few seconds. When he turned around, everyone on the boat was looking at him in shock. Amy, on the other hand, was blinking and looking at his hand seriously. The strange silence lasted for a few seconds. Meg, who was so embarrassed that he wanted to jump back in the water, finally came back to his senses. He let go of his hands and feet and fell onto the deck with a thud. This time, all the girls felt pain when they heard it. Meg stood up while rubbing his aching buttocks. He laughed awkwardly and said frankly, I don't know how to swim. Such a simple and straightforward reason. If he did not know how to swim, would such an awkward situation have happened? If he knew how to swim, would that shark have been able to open its mouth in time? In any case, he just did not know how to swim. He was holding onto a life-saving straw in the water. No matter what position he was in, he just had to hold on tight. Everyone looked at Meg's slightly pale face and quickly understood. Meg was just a normal person. It was normal that he did not know how to swim. Because he was usually too outstanding and well-rounded, it was easy for people to overlook this point. Although Gina's face was red, she did not think that Meg had gone overboard. That was because when she grabbed onto Meg, she felt his helplessness and nervousness. It was not intentional. It was just a subconscious action. Amy walked forward and hugged Meg as she softly whispered into his ear, It's okay, Father. Meg will learn how to swim very soon. Let Meg protect you in the future. Okay. Meg's heart warmed as he hugged Amy tightly. When he looked at the sea again, the fear in his heart disappeared instantly. I'm sorry. I did not control my strength well, Elizabeth said to Meg apologetically. It's okay. It's not your fault. I'm a little seasick. Meg shook his head. Elizabeth's landing accuracy was much better than the system's, so he really could not blame her. However, he did not expect that after such a long time, his after effects of the sea would still be so serious. He could not even struggle after entering the water. It was indeed a failure. Gina, can you sense the location of Lantis? Is it right below us? Meg asked Gina as he turned to look at her. He had to find something more important to talk about in this awkward atmosphere. Gina nodded vigorously. She pointed below and firmly said, Lantis. When she entered the water to save Meg earlier, Gina felt a calling from underwater. She was 100% sure that it was Lantis. Her hometown was calling her. Go home. Go back to Lantis. Meg smiled at Gina and said, I know how to defeat the nether sharks. If you need help, we will be here waiting for you and your tribesmen. He took out a wet drawing from his pocket. On it was the drawing of him using a mysterious object to chase away the nether sharks and shatter the nether whirlwind. He passed it to Gina. Oh, Lantis is saved. Gina looked at the drawing with surprise on her face. Mr. Meg really knew how to chase away the nether sharks. She took the drawing carefully and kept it close to her body before hugging Meg excitedly. No pop-up window. Chapter 1082. Gina, this spatial ring is for you. You can return it to me the next time we meet. Elizabeth passed the spatial ring to Gina and taught her how to open it at the same time. Thank you, Gina said gratefully to Elizabeth as she put the ring on her finger carefully. Goodbye. Gina looked around at the people on the wooden boat. She waved her hand and jumped into the water, revealing her rainbow fishtail. She quickly dived into the depths of the sea and disappeared from everyone's sight. All right, we can start our vacation mode now. Meg smiled at everyone as he took out the sea fishing tools that he had prepared in advance from a box. These were all ready-made tools that he had bought from the system. Although there was no lack of experts on the boat who could catch fish out of thin air, the most enjoyable part of fishing was the process. He taught the ladies how to hook, how to throw the rod, and how to enjoy the process of fishing while basking in the warm winter sun. Anna, your fishing line is entangled with mine. Phyllis, can you move your fishing rod? I feel like our fishing lines are going to be entangled with each other. My fishing rod is going to be thrown out together. Meg didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the ladies' mishaps during their first time fishing. He could only act as a firefighter and be responsible for placing everyone's fishing rods in the right position so that they only had to wait for the fish to take the bait. Only then did he return to his seat and wait. Amy sat beside Meg with a little purple fishing rod in front of her. Ugly Duckling squatted beside her and stole a glance at her. Then it reached out its hand carefully toward the prawn that was used as bait. Its sharp little claws were already exposed. Ugly Duckling, you're not allowed to eat the prawns. Otherwise, I'll use you as bait. Amy said seriously as she lowered her head. Meow. Ugly Duckling retracted its little claws and stroked the prawn's head gently before retracting them obediently. A smile appeared on Meg's lips. It would be such a waste if she didn't go into beast taming with her talent. Sea fishing was an art. Perhaps it was because of the previous shark, Meg, and the others waited for an hour, but no fish took the bait. Meg looked around. Apart from Elizabeth, who was still staring intently at the fishing rod, everyone else was already leaning against the comfortable lounge chairs and falling asleep in the warm sunlight, including Ugly Duckling, who was hugging a shrimp. Should we go somewhere else? Meg raised his eyebrows and wondered if he should change the fishing spot. At this moment, his fishing rod suddenly bent downwards and the bell rang loudly. He took the bait. Almost at the same time, everyone on the boat opened their eyes and reached out to grab the fishing rods in front of them. It's with me. Meg held on tightly to the fishing rod that was already bent like a longbow. Judging from the strength of the fishing rod, this should be a big guy, bigger than any fish he had ever caught before. The wooden boat shook visibly. The fish began to circle around the wooden boat, messing up the fishing line. However, the girls didn't get angry because of this. Instead, they all gathered around the edge of the boat with great interest. This was the first fish that took the bait after more than an hour. They looked down at the water, wanting to know what kind of fish Meg had caught. This fish was quite strong, but Meg was very calm. One had to know that he had 7th tier strength now, and his strength wouldn't be reduced by standing on the boat. Furthermore, when he bought the fishing rod, the system had already promised that the quality of the fishing rod, hook, and line was guaranteed to be 5,000 kilograms. After letting the big guy swim for a while, Meg began to reel in the line slowly. Anyway, he didn't lack strength, and he didn't have to worry about whether the hook and line would break. Go, father, go! Amy and Anna clenched their little fists and cheered at the side with a look of admiration on their little faces. With the little lowly cheering him on, Meg was naturally even more motivated. When he was almost done reeling in the line, he grabbed the fishing rod with both hands and swung it up forcefully. A big fish with blue stripes was thrown out of the water and landed on the wooden boat with a splash. The whole wooden boat shook with it. This big fish was more than 2 meters long and weighed more than 100 kilograms. The blue-striped fish scales shone brightly under the sun, and there was a layer of faint golden light on the surface of its body. A mutated grouper species? Meg looked at that fish with surprise. It seemed to be a first-tier magic beast, but it seemed to have lost its dreams after coming ashore. It opened its mouth, but didn't even try to struggle. Wow, what a big fish! Amy exclaimed in surprise and pounced on it directly. Meow. Ugly Duckling's eyes were green with envy. It also pounced on it and pressed down on the big fish's tail. Right at this moment, a fierce look suddenly appeared in the big fish's eyes. It bent its body as if it wanted to slap Ugly Duckling away. Bam! Without waiting for it to move, and it had already smacked its head, knocking it out of breath with a single blow. Everyone who was about to make a move looked at Yabamiya, who was holding the oar. Did I hit it a little too hard? Yabamiya put away the oar in her hand embarrassedly and stuck out her tongue. It's my first time seeing such a big fish, so I was a little nervous. Well done, Mia. Leave the rest to me. Meg stepped forward with the cleaver and began to kill the fish. Although he didn't know what kind of fish it was from its appearance, it should be some kind of grouper. He had seen a 100-kilogram grouper before, but this was the first time he had caught one himself. Furthermore, it was a first-tier magic beast, so it was naturally more rare. He couldn't help but be curious about the quality of the meat of this big fish. Since there was fish, he naturally had to grill it. However, this fish was too big, so he could only take a section to grill it. Other than that, Meg took a piece of fresh fish meat and cut it into 2 plates of sashimi. The fresh fish meat was pink in color, and there were beautiful white wavy patterns on it. When cut into long strips, it looked very tempting. It would take a while to grill the fish, so Meg called the ladies over to try the sashimi first. Amy looked at the sashimi with confusion and asked, "Father, how can we eat the fish if it's not cooked?" Everyone also looked at Meg with confusion. They had never eaten raw food in the restaurant before. Every time, Meg would cook the ingredients into delicious dishes. This is a marine fish, so there are very few parasites on it. Therefore, it's fine to eat a moderate amount of sashimi. Meg used his chopsticks to pick up a piece of sashimi and put it on the plate. Then, he picked up some wasabi and put on the fish. He folded the fish, covered the wasabi, and dipped it in soy sauce before putting it into his mouth. He chewed lightly, and the freshness of the fish, the aroma of the soy sauce, and the spiciness of the wasabi all bloomed in his mouth at the same time. His taste buds seemed to have bloomed as well. Chapter 1083. Under the deep sea, the light was getting dimmer and dimmer. A figure shot downwards like a sharp arrow. That dark water curtain had already appeared in Gina's vision. This was the first time she saw the water curtain that sealed Lantis from the outside. It was like an inverted bowl that held Lantis in place. So, Lantis is so small, and the outside world is so big. Gina mumbled to herself. She used her hand to protect the piece of paper that was hidden in front of her chest. Then, she held the trident and smashed it against the light curtain. The light screen trembled and collapsed like a balloon. In the end, it still broke open a hole. Gina went through and turned back to look at the light curtain that had already recovered. Her face was filled with surprise. I did it. The cursed barrier that the merfolk of Lantis had not been able to go through for so many years was easily penetrated by her. As expected, the light curtain lost its effect after she gained the ability to breathe. A few merfolk who were fishing nearby saw the light curtain ripple suddenly. Then, a figure came through the light curtain. One of them opened his mouth in shock and hurriedly dodged. It's Princess Gina. Soon, someone recognized Gina and exclaimed, Princess Gina is back. She actually went through the cursed wall. Has she already found the Chosen One? The news that Gina went to find the Chosen One had already spread throughout Lantis. Lantis placed all their hopes on her. The merfolk looked at Gina, who came through the wall, and quickly thought of many possibilities. Their faces were filled with surprise. Yes, I'm back. Gina kept her trident and transformed into a stream of light. She swam toward the capital, Evo City, directly below. Gina, in the palace, the high priest, who had his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes. Gina's image appeared on the crystal ball in front of him. Has she already found a way to go through the seal? The high priest's murky eyes lit up immediately. Even his hands were trembling uncontrollably. Princess Gina is back. The cheers quickly spread throughout the capital. The merfolk looked up at the stream of light that was rapidly approaching them and shouted excitedly. The news of the Nether Shark's invasion had already spread throughout the capital. Pessimism and despair were spreading. Gina's sudden return was like a cardiac stimulant that made Evo City boil instantly. Gina is back. Lantis is saved. In the palace, when the king heard the cheers coming from outside the palace, he immediately stood up and swam outside excitedly. Gina, my child, you are finally back. The queen was also delighted as she followed the king and swam out of the palace. The colorful flowing light slowly stopped on the altar. Gina retracted her fishtail and stood on the altar with her legs. She looked at her clansmen who had surrounded the altar with a smile. The mermaids looked at Gina in surprise. However, when their gazes fell on the strange clothes she was wearing, they all looked curious. Unlike their clothes that were made of seashells and seaweed, the clothes that the princess was wearing looked more classy and did not seem to be from Lantis. A dim light flashed, and the high priest in a black robe appeared on the altar. High priest. Gina bowed respectfully. The merpeople around the altar also bowed respectfully. His Majesty the King, Her Majesty the Queen. Another loud shout rang out, and the crowd opened up a path. The king and queen quickly arrived at the altar. Father, mother. Gina bowed again, and all the merfolk followed suit. The high priest stared at Gina for a while before saying in a hoarse voice, Gina, have you seen the Chosen One? Have you learned the breathing technique on land? Everyone looked at Gina with a fervent gaze. This was extremely important to Lantis. The fate of Lantis could change completely because of this. Even the king and queen were looking forward to it. Gina nodded vigorously and said, Yes, I have seen the Chosen One, Mr. Meg. He saved me and made the miracle medicine that gave me the ability to breathe on land. Also, I passed through the cursed barrier directly without any hindrance. The Chosen One, miracle medicine. There was an uproar among the mere people, and their faces were filled with excitement. The king stepped forward and asked, Gina, have you brought back that miracle medicine? Where's the Chosen One now? The king took a step forward and asked Gina with an agitated expression. Yes, Mr. Meg gave me many miracle medicines, and the beautiful Miss Elizabeth lent me her spatial ring so that I could bring all the miracle medicines back. Gina nodded and raised the spatial ring in her hand. She thought for a while, and with a wave of her finger, she pushed the seawater away and opened up a waterless space. Then, she activated the spatial ring and poured out all the mud casings. The mud casings with a golden glow were like some kind of mysterious eggshell, and the eyes of the mere people lit up. Is this the miracle medicine that can remove the curse on my people? Could it be the eggshell of some mythical beast? The high priest walked forward and looked at the mud casings in the waterless space. His eyes were shining as if he was looking at the most precious treasure. In order to let the mere people get rid of the curse, generations of priests had worked hard for thousands of years, but they all failed. And now, the antidote was right in front of them, and they could reach it. The world outside the barrier was no longer far away. The merpeople's eyes were also filled with respect and desire. This was the hope of Lantis. Gina shook her head and said, "No, this was made by Mr. Meg. Although there is indeed a very delicious chicken in this eggshell, it shouldn't be some mythical beast because there are many people who eat one every day and abandon this eggshell." A series of gasps could be heard, and the mere people looked at Gina in disbelief. Even the high priest's expression froze. Are the people in the outside world already so extravagant? The king said with difficulty, with a worried expression. Then, aren't their abilities already very terrifying? Gina thought for a while and said, "I saw 5 10th-tier powerhouses at Mr. Meg's place, and 2 of them came to the restaurant to eat every day. Among the waitresses at Mr. Meg's restaurant, there is an 8th-tier frost dragon, Miss Elizabeth, and a 7th-tier spatial magic caster, Miss Barbara. Mr. Meg's daughter, little Amy, is 4 years old this year, and she is already a 6th-tier magic caster." The high priest's face was filled with shock. There was dead silence around the altar instantly, and the merpeople's faces were filled with fear. A 4-year-old 6th-tier magic caster. After more than 1,000 years, has the outside world become so terrifying? The king's voice was trembling. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1084. A merfolk's lifespan could reach up to 300 years. Gina was already a rare prodigy among the merfolk, but she had only just started cultivating when she was 4 years old. This difference made the king's heart turn cold. He had once thought of bringing Lantis out of the sea and returning to the mainland so that Lantis could have a foothold on the Norland continent again and even join the fight for the mainland. However, after hearing Gina's words, he had completely given up on this idea. Gina had only been out for a few days, and she had already met 5 10th-tier powerhouses. She could even see 2 of them every day. Were 10th-tier powerhouses everywhere in the outside world already? The outside world was too scary. Lantis might have been able to live peacefully for 1,000 years because of this cursed light screen. The merfolk had similar thoughts. Gina's brief words had already revealed the difference between Lantis and the outside world without a doubt. If they had to be bullied and enslaved by other races after leaving the sea, they might as well stay under the sea. Even if they were to face the terrifying nether sharks, they would only die. Everyone's sudden silence made Gina at a loss. Everyone who was extremely agitated just now felt like they had been hit in the head. She didn't know what she had said wrong. Mr. Meg and the rest are very nice. Those who came to the restaurant to eat are also very nice. Everyone is very nice, Gina explained. She could feel everyone's fear, but she didn't understand why they were so fearful. Gina's consolation calmed everyone down a little. The high priest looked at Gina and asked, "Gina, how many of our people can gain the ability to breathe on land?" No matter what the outside world was like, Lantis was about to face an attack from the nether sharks. These divine medicines could at least allow some of the people to gain the ability to break free from the cursed barrier and leave Lantis. If Evo City really couldn't survive the nether whirlpool's frenzy this time, then preserving the fire seed of Lantis would become a very important matter. Gina thought for a while and said, "Back then, I gained the ability to breathe in the air after eating a complete divine medicine. There are a total of 321 eggshells here. At least 321 of our people can gain the ability to breathe in the air." "All right." The high priest nodded with a thoughtful expression. The king composed himself and asked again, "Gina, did the Chosen One tell us how we should deal with the Nether Vortex?" As a king, since he couldn't lead his people to rebuild Lantis' glory, the most important thing now was to ensure Lantis' survival. The merman also looked at Gina. Surviving was everyone's wish. "Nether sharks," Mr. Meg said he had a way to drive the nether sharks away. He even drew a blueprint for me and asked me to hand it over to the high priest. Gina's eyes lit up. She turned sideways and took out the blueprint that Meg had given her earlier. Everyone's eyes lit up with hope. If they could expel the nether sharks, they could at least survive. However, as soon as Gina took out her blueprint, it was instantly crushed into powder by the terrifying water pressure. "This!" Gina stared blankly at the blueprint that had disintegrated into white powder in the water. "No more." Everyone was also shocked, staring at the slowly sinking powder. They couldn't help but blink. If the way to save Lantis disappeared so absurdly, wouldn't that be too hard to accept? "It's all right. I have memorized the blueprint. I can draw it again," Gina hurriedly said. She waved her hand, and a ball of white sand flew up from the side of the altar. Then, she laid it flat on the altar under her guidance. She squatted down and used her finger to draw on the sand. Soon, the two drawings were completed. They were almost identical to the blueprint that Meg had given her earlier. One of them was a strange thing that used a wave-shaped thing to drive the nether sharks away, while the other was a person who easily shattered the nether sharks' hurricane and subdued them. "Was this really given to you by the Chosen One?" The high priest couldn't help but exclaim. Lantis and the nether sharks have been fighting for thousands of years, but they had never found a way to break the nether vortex. However, in this drawing, that person easily broke the vortex. This was simply too unbelievable. The king and queen couldn't hide the surprise on their faces. If this could really be realized, then Lantis' crisis would be easily resolved. Gina nodded and said, "Yes, Mr. Meg is up there now. High Priest and Father can go up with me to meet him. He is a very good person and will definitely help us." "That's great. God has blessed Lantis. He has sent the Chosen One to save us," the High Priest said in a deep voice as he clenched his fists. "Lantis is finally free from the threat of the nether sharks. This is a great blessing," the king also said agitatedly. The merfolk also let out joyful cheers. The huge rock that had been pressing on everyone's hearts was finally removed. "Gina, how do we consume this miracle medicine? I want to meet the Honorable Chosen One personally to thank him for bringing hope to Lantis," the high priest said to Gina. The taste of the sashimi bloomed naturally when it entered the mouth. There was no fishy taste at all. Instead, it had a sweet and fresh taste. The texture of the fish was so chewy, and it blended with the soy sauce and wasabi. The more one chewed, the more fragrant it became. His mouth was full of saliva, and he almost chewed his tongue. Fragrant, sweet, sandy, salty, and spicy. The 5 flavors blended into one, and the wonderful feeling made Meg's eyebrows raise uncontrollably. The fresh taste of the sea didn't need any cooking. It was already a delicious delicacy. Phew! This fish is simply made to be sashimi. Meg couldn't help but praise after swallowing it in one mouthful. Is it really that delicious? I want to try it too. Amy was the first to come forward. The others still maintained a spectating posture. Meg rolled up a piece of sashimi for Amy and fed it to her. Amy frowned at first, as if she was overwhelmed by the taste of the wasabi. However, after chewing a few mouthfuls, her frown quickly dispersed, and she became happier as she chewed. Even her body couldn't help but sway slightly as she immersed herself in the delicious food. Gulp. Someone secretly swallowed their saliva. Wow, this sashimi is so delicious. Father, I want more. Amy swallowed the fish in her mouth and immediately said to Meg, "All right, I'll get some for you." Meg nodded with a smile. He picked up another piece of sashimi and wrapped it with wasabi and fed it to Amy. "It looks really delicious. I want to try it too." Yabamiya quickly joined the group of people who wanted to try it. She imitated Meg and wrapped the wasabi with the fish, dipped in the soy sauce, and put it in her mouth. "Oh my God, why does the fish taste like this? Why isn't there any fishy taste at all?" Mia was shocked as she felt the wonderful taste wreaking havoc in her mouth. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.